Perfect timing, too. There we go. Hello, everybody. We are on the air. This is Behind the Scenes of AV Rant Podcast. Yes, Lee is
I'm
here.
watching my mouth this time.
There you go.
The behind the scenes got a little salty last time I was on.
I think we're all right. Aren't you allowed to say that on TV now?
You can. I mean, if I see it on cable TV, and it's been on South Park for 15 years,
right.
So I think it's okay.
Well, this is behind the scenes. So, actually, what you see in the video is going to end up being our video. So it actually should be a pretty decent thing. But the audio will get cleaned up if there's any audio glitches or something like that. That shall get cleaned up.
If I say dirty words, we'll clean it up.
Well, not that type. More like just noise and
right.
Whatever dropouts if there are any dropouts.
Really,
the video is going to be the video.
This isn't so much behind the scenes as it is just scenes.
Yeah, this one's just live. This is
just
really just live. And I don't know. I didn't hear from Tom, so it doesn't appear that he's. Is he even? Oh, he's on Gmail.
He's just watching. He wants to see should he get mad at me for ruining his podcast. That's what he's doing. He's just watching. He's lurking.
I think with this being holiday week and all, he's enjoying the prep time. So yeah. All right. Let's kick on. Let's get on into this thing.
All right.
So yeah, you've been warned. This is behind the scenes, folks. It's going to be what it is.
That's one way to put it.
That's right. All right. A little bit of silence, and I'll begin. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. My name is Rob H, and this week I am here with
Lee Overstreet, pinch hitter and color commentator for AV Rant. Here again to have fun with Rob.
Yes. Tom Andry is, we think, away this week. I don't know. Who knows? He might try to join this call like halfway through. We don't really know what's going to happen.
I think he's kind of just watching, lurking in the background and wringing his hands and darting his beady eyes back and forth.
He's probably just busy with his kids and wife. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone in the United States. It is Thanksgiving week. It's going to be Black Friday, so of course that's always a big deal for everyone into home theater stuff.
I don't do Black Friday at all. I refuse. It's too much mental pressure, too much physical pressure if you try to go to a store. We just worry about 0 hour, and that is eating time on Thanksgiving. So that's like 45 hours from now. And we've been doing our typical annual mad panic dash to clean up and fix you have to start all your home renovations like 48 hours before everybody shows up. Yeah. So I'm quite worn out from yard work, and there's been painting and a door thing. And then I drank beer. So I might just slump over at some point during the podcast. If I do, I'm sure there's a button you can press to send me an electric shock, like through YouTube or something.
I don't know about that, but I guess I'll just keep talking because that's been going on in a couple of these podcasts.
I might just
me talking after other people have disappeared. But yes, this is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And yeah, that whole answering questions thing, that's what we do. We're a Q&A podcast. So if you'd like to get your question onto the podcast and answered, please email it to us. That's question@avrant.com is our email address. That's the place to send your questions. Please do so. You can also get in touch with us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/AVRant Podcast. And of course, you can come to our website, which is avrant.com. And apparently, leaving a comment there isn't exactly working yet. We heard from Mark, who runs Accessories for Life. He's like, I wanted to sign in and leave a comment, but I'm going to leave it here on Facebook because that's not working at the website. So who knows? I'll see if we can sick like Tom or Two-Way onto that.
We don't want to miss Accessories for Less comments because there may be some awesome coupon deal or something that he throws on there.
So, you can also get in touch with us individually. You can reach me at rob@avrant.com. That's my email. Or on Twitter, I am @FirstReflect. And Tom is tom@avrant.com. And his Twitter is @avrant_Tom. Of course, you can reach us on, not reach us, but see the podcast on YouTube, youtube.com/avrant. And folks can reach Lee Overstreet, our guest co-host this week, on Twitter as well, right?
Yes, they can. They can reach me at Lee Overtweet is my Twitter handle. And people find at Lee Overtweet, and then they kind of figure out what my Instagram handle might be. And I'm also the Lee Overstreet on YouTube. I for some reason, it's all one word because I couldn't get Lee Overstreet at the time. And I can't figure this out. YouTube is so weird. All I do is upload weird old videos I have on videotape and stuff I got off television and like old home movies, but somehow I have several hundred subscribers. I'm trying to figure out what to do with them. I need to, start some strange cult. I don't know.
That's pretty good. You probably have more views on each video than we do. But that's okay. We're a podcast.
I don't know.
We have more listeners on the podcast. So that's the way it's supposed to be. Well, we want to start off the podcast by thanking our listeners of the week. Those are people who support the podcast in some way. Mm-hmm. One great way to become a listener of the week is to go to our website, avrant.com, and over on the right-hand side, there's a button that says support the podcast. That'll take you to PayPal. You can leave a donation there using your PayPal account or just using a credit card. You do not have to sign up for PayPal if you don't want to. Yet again, Tom has not come into this topic list, so he has not written down if anybody donated via PayPal. If you have, we will mention your name next week, and thank you very much if anybody did that. You can also support the podcast financially on Patreon. So that's patreon.com/AVRant podcast. If you'd like to sign up, it's an automatic monthly, you can think of it like a subscription, basically. Yeah. You say how much money you would like to give to AVRant each and every month, and it will automatically be deducted. So we have 78...
It's a lot like a tip at a restaurant, isn't it? Really? Yeah. I mean, here's how much I appreciated that, and I found this much utility in what you said.
That's right. I think of it as a voluntary subscription.
Yeah, exactly.
And whatever amount you want. We're still waiting on that person to give us like infinity dollars a month. It would be nice. But we have 78 patrons over there, which is awesome. That number has gone up. So thank you very much to everyone over on Patreon.
Look at that. Every episode, a few more people helping out. That's wonderful.
And we also will gladly call you a listener of the week for supporting us in some way, not necessarily financially. So Jason G, he got in touch with Tom after hearing about Tom's brother who needs a replacement PS3. So not sure if all that's worked out, but Jason very kindly offered to get a replacement PS3 for Tom's brother. So that's awesome that someone is willing to help us
super
out
nice
that way.
And definitely makes him a listener of the week for sure.
For sure. So thank you, Jason. And we're going to go right into my review of the SVS Prime wireless speakers. So
this I'm looking forward to hearing.
Yeah. So, these were very kindly sent to me for review by SVS. Want to give a shout out to Nick over there, who's sort of been the man on point, who's been in touch with us. And so, want to dig right into these, showing some images on YouTube, just the basic images of what these speakers look like. Now, just mention that SVS always does a fantastic job of packaging their things for shipping. So arrived with a few little dings in the box, as you would expect when things are being sent via the postal service, but arrived in great shape inside. They always do a good job of packaging. And size-wise, they basically fall in between the Prime Satellite and the Prime Bookshelf speakers. They're about an inch larger in every dimension, height, width, and depth than these Prime Satellites, and about an inch less in every dimension than the bookshelves. So they fall right in between. And as you might expect with that size, they also fall right in between as far as the claimed base extension. So the Prime Satellites extend somewhere close to down to about 60 hertz. These Prime wireless speakers get down to about 50 hertz, and then the bookshelves get down into the 40s. That's the claimed frequency response. So they use the exact same drivers, as far as I can tell, as the Prime Satellite speakers. So it's the 4.5-inch woofer and the 1-inch aluminum dome tweeter.
Right.
So I'm going to just go straight into the sound quality, because that's what people probably want to know most. I will say that, first of all, they can get surprisingly loud. I'm in about a 900 square foot apartment, put them in my theater. When they were in my theater and I was in my actual theater, I had the volume quite low on them. Wow. And when I opened up the doors of my theater and was just letting them play music throughout my entire apartment, I don't think I ever had the volume above about half as much as half the volume dial. And it was completely sufficiently loud to fill my entire apartment at that range. So they have lots of output. That is one of the things that they're claiming. That is one of the points of these. They do go for $500 a pair. So comparing them to Sonos speakers or Amazon Echo speakers or Google Home speakers, these things, Denon Heo speakers, Yamaha MusicCast speakers, these are the types of things that they're going up against. And I would say as far as just sheer raw output goes, they're definitely equal or louder than pretty much anything you get at the same price. So that's going to be a benefit to people. Now, are they the best speakers I've ever heard in my life? No, can't say that, but you wouldn't expect that for $500 a pair, full stop. And then these are also fully self-powered, as the name implies. So pretty good deal on that side. And I will review them as proper speakers, and that in itself is a compliment, because when we're talking about a wireless speaker system, sometimes we're often talking like, oh, it's pretty good for the price, or it's pretty good for the form factor, or we
make all wireless speakers, they're not half bad. Right.
That's right, but these are proper speakers. Like I say, they're basically the prime satellites in a slightly larger cabinet. And I will say, to my ear, they had a little bit of a smiley-faced curve, and listening to a full frequency sweep from 20 kilohertz all the way down to 20 hertz, that bore out in that sweep, I would say right in the sort of 2 to 4 kilohertz range. There was a little bit of an emphasis, what they might call the presence range, and sort of down in... Yeah, and down right around 150 hertz, there's a little bit of a hump, and then they definitely started to roll off right around 60 hertz. So the claimed extension of minus 3 decibels at 52 hertz, it seems right about spot on. SVS is always very accurate with their given specs, and so I hear that just starting to roll off at about 60 hertz. Really nothing much below about 45 hertz is coming out of the speakers, but wouldn't expect that much for speakers of this size, and plus your room is completely taking over at this point. Now they do, on the back, have a subwoofer output, and as soon as you plug an RCA cable into that jack, it activates the subwoofer output, which activates an automatic 80 hertz crossover. Can't adjust that. It's just going to be 80 hertz. But yeah, gave that a try. Now, Nick very kindly provided a firmware update. So yes, even your speakers now might have firmware updates. So he provided a firmware update since when they were brand new, they had a little bit of an issue where the signal coming out wasn't at the full gain that it was meant to be. So they issued a firmware update. You can just do that through the USB service port that is on the back, and it is only a service port, that USB jack. You can't plug in a USB source and use it that way. So these are not USB speakers. You're not going to plug into the USB port of your computer and use USB to send audio. That is only a service jack. But as you can see, if you're seeing the images on YouTube, there's multiple different inputs on the back of these speakers.
One suspects there's like a little Raspberry Pi hiding in there.
Well, there's some kind of DSP going on in there for sure. It does have essentially 4 amplifiers, 1 amplifier for each driver, and only the speaker that is on the right has all of the electronics built into it. That's where the power cord goes. That's where all the electronics are. The speaker that goes on the left, and it does always have to be that way. The powered speaker always has to be the right speaker, and the passive speaker always has to be the left speaker. And it comes with a 10-foot, you could say, proprietary speaker cable. I mean, looking at it, it's really just a positive, negative for the tweeter and woofer that's being fed over to the left speaker, but it is sort of a proprietary cable. You can't just use regular speaker wire to connect the 2 speakers. Now, one immediate little thing that I would love to see improved is the included power cord is only about 5 feet long, and since that's powered speaker always has to be the right speaker, depending on where your outlet is, it might be, it has to be on the right hand side, and the power cord is only about 5 feet long. Now, of course, there's no problem.
So if you have these way up the wall, you're going to need to extend the power up there somehow.
Yeah, you're going to need an extension cord, which no big deal. It is just a regular 2-prong cord, but I wouldn't mind the power cord, the included one, being a little bit longer than that.
I wonder, because that's not a particularly unusual power cord connection, the little sort of figure 8 connection.
It's the little figure of 8.
Like a 20-foot version of that.
Absolutely.
There you go. Well, that's your answer, because you don't want like a extension cord adapter hanging 2 feet off your floor if you want to mount these up high, which you certainly could. And you know what's so interesting to me? These remind me of those speakers I bought for our kitchen that I bragged about, those Cantos, that brand name Canto. Similar set of inputs and outputs, but of course these have much nicer drivers. The one I have is a little silk cone tweeter and a little 4-inch paper cone woofer, but the ins and outs and the overall not performance but functions are similar to a lot of speakers in this size range. But those look really really nice. And the curve you describe is to be expected from speakers of this size, where they try to
and
enhance.
that's a choice. So it sort of makes the bass seem a little bit fuller, and it makes the treble seem a little bit more pronounced. And I will say, what stood out to me perhaps the most, or right on initial listening and throughout the listening that I did, is that the imaging of the speakers is excellent.
There you go.
So in terms of giving a great center-locked stereo image, in terms of moving objects side to side, really, really clean, really, really good imaging. And I will say, as far as the soundstage goes, I found that the critical mid-range voices in that seem to come from just slightly behind the physical plane of the speakers. So I would say they're... sometimes people call that laid back. I don't really like that term. I use the term talking about imaging and soundstage, where it seems as though the sound is emanating from just slightly behind the physical plane of the speakers, which actually, if you set them up on either side of a television, works out really nicely. Really makes it seem like the sound is coming from the television, as long as you place the speakers just slightly in front. So, do have that little bit of emphasis in the treble, little bit of emphasis in the bass, and are
they particularly directional?
No, very forgiving of placement.
Great.
Really didn't have to play with the toe in at all to get that imaging. You could aim them straight forward, aim them straight at you. Didn't make a tremendous difference. So wide dispersion, even dispersion, and I will mention again another thing. So he's got all this DSP control in that, but it doesn't have any tone controls, doesn't have any built-in EQ. So if you want to alter the sound, of course you can do so via placement on the low end, put them closer to a wall, you'll get some boundary reinforcement, but there's no electronic way to alter the sound signature. So you could connect them via RCAs to just the pre-outs of an AV receiver and use the built-in EQ on that or something, or even connect them, your source to a mini DSP and the mini DSP into this, and that could be another way, but built in, they don't have a way of EQing them. So this brings me to usage, because first thing I did is just set them up with my computer, used an optical output from my computer into the optical input on the back of these. And as a desktop setup, they're fantastic. They've got the controls on the front for controlling the volume and selecting which input that you're going to use. And like I say, I mean, crazy loud if you're using it in a desktop setup.
I can imagine right in your face. Yeah, that's as much as you ever need.
They do have a little bit of a noise floor. That noise floor does not seem to change based on the volume dial setting. So it's just the inherent little bit of hiss, and that hiss does not get loud. You can turn the volume up as high as it goes, and thankfully that hiss does not get louder. So that is a good sign. But if you are within, I would say, 10 inches.
Oh, okay.
Right? So that's very close.
Well, you're not going to sit that close, are you?
Probably not. But as a desktop
wearing
setup,
them like headphones.
Yeah, as a desktop setup, it's not impossible. You might be, a foot away. But overall, yeah, certainly in a TV setup or using them what I think as intended, which is really as music speakers, a whole house audio type of setup. Definitely not a problem on that. And again, I'm being critical. I'm gonna review these as I would review any higher end pair of speakers. So keep that in mind. All right. Anything I'm talking about are more like nitpicks, but I think that's what people want from me on this podcast.
No, that's exactly what they want from you. Yeah.
Other reviewers aren't gonna maybe be that critical of them. So I did find on the high end a little bit of a bite in the treble. I use a glockenspiel sound to evaluate that on all the speakers that I listen to. So I got a little bit of an extra bite in that treble, which makes sense. Little emphasis in that 2 to 4 kilohertz range. And I use a bassoon on the low end to always hear how realistic it sounds in that upper bass region. And again, there's got that little bit of emphasis built right in there. So it didn't give me the cleanest bassoon sound that I've ever heard. But again, I'm being very critical of that. So these are good speakers. I will not call them, SVS might hate this, but I'm not going to call them great speakers in a price no object sense.
Oh, right? Of course. Well, one would not expect in this price range for it to compete with something that's a couple $1,000s.
Exactly. Yeah, they don't match up with $1,500 or $2,000 per pair of speakers. Sure. They're are speakers that can sound better, but for a self-powered for $500 a pair, very good. And like I said, I'm talking small emphasis in the treble and bass here. This is overall quite a linear speaker. And like I said, the imaging, really, really good. So let's get into controlling them otherwise, because one of the things I was hoping to maybe do is use them in place of a sound bar with a television.
Sure.
That is going to be a challenge because really the only way to control these remotely is via the DTS Play Fi app. And that really is the only app that works with these.
So there's not a volume remote.
There is not a separate IR remote, and I tried using my Harmony Hub because I was like, hey, these connect via Wi-Fi. Can I use a Harmony Hub to control them via Wi-Fi? Well, the Harmony Hub could not find them on my Wi-Fi network, and searching for them in Harmony's database, they're not in there yet. Is that something SVS might be able to do? Could they perhaps work with Logitech and get these added to Harmony's database? I don't know. I would love to see that happen, because as it stands, if you wanted to use them basically in place of a soundbar, the only way you could control the volume is either walking up and turning the physical dial or using the DTS Play-Fi app on a phone or a tablet.
Unless your TV has a variable audio output.
That is the other way. If your TV has a variable audio output and you just connect it to the RCA inputs, then that would work.
Does anybody make a TV where the optical is variable?
Nope. That doesn't happen.
That could be interesting. But
so there is another way to control these, which is via an Amazon Echo device. That works, but it only works with Amazon Echoes right now. It doesn't work with Google Home products. As of yet, again, is that something that could potentially be added? Sure. But it all seems to be based on what can the DTS Play-Fi app work with, because there's no SVS branded app for this. It's all the DTS Play-Fi app that controls these speakers. So you really are a little bit at the mercy of DTS Play-Fi, and if you want to control them via your voice, the only way you can do that right now is with Amazon Echo devices. So the question becomes, if that's already what you're using for your wireless and whole house audio, you're good to go. But if you already have invested in some other setup, adding these to it might not be the easiest and smoothest thing, right? You're either going to have to choose to use DTS Play-Fi if you want these integrated with the rest of your whole house audio system, or you'll have to make sure that you're using the Amazon Echo ecosystem to control things that way. So I don't know. That's going to be something to be aware of, right? Because for a lot of people, that's going to work absolutely fine. But for some people, they're going to be like, I already have Google Home devices, can't integrate it with that. Or I've already got some Sonos devices, can't integrate it with that.
Well, if I want to use these for surround speakers.
You'd have to... There's not really a way to do that.
Not a way to do it. There you go.
Yeah, they're not really for that. So these are meant for, like, to go up against something like Sonos, to go up against something like Denon Hios in a whole house audio setup. But like all of those, if you went Sonos, well, everything has to be Sonos. If you went Hios, everything has to be Hios. Everything would have to be DTS Play-Fi, which actually opens you up to more brands, right? But it does have to be DTS Play-Fi. So something to be aware of there. Can't really say they're a great replacement for a soundbar because of that limitation. And I hope that they'll get Harmony on board and get them added to the Harmony Hub database. So I think, was there anything else to cover on those? I mean, overall, I give them a thumbs up, but there are some limitations, I think, that you want to be aware of before you just buy these and go, for sure they're going to work in whatever scenario I can think of. Right. Not necessarily. There's some things to be aware of there.
But they sound like good value. They're in that point in the price to performance curve where it's going to shoot up beyond that price. If you want higher quality than this, the price starts to skyrocket.
And I definitely like that you can add a subwoofer to them with an automatic crossover. That's a feature that I really like.
Very nice.
There we go. Well, I've wasted a lot of time, but there we go.
Yeah, but I'd rather be thorough. I want people to hear accurate information. Shall I continue on with
Absolutely. We're going to dig right into the news now.
Sure. SVS launched their 3000 series subwoofers, the $1,000 SB3000 and $1,400 PB3000. There's no PC3000 cylinder in this particular series. Use an all-new 13-inch driver paired with an 800-watt, 2,500-watt peak amplifier that can be controlled with the SVS app. Including a 3-band parametric EQ and programmable custom presets. There's a new, quote, intelligent control interface, close quotes, on the back of the subs if you don't want to use the app. 18 hertz, minus 3 decibel points for both models when sealed. 16 hertz, minus 3 dB for the PB3000 when both of its ports, yes, it has 2 ports instead of 3, are open. There doesn't appear to be a single port mode. So
none was mentioned. Yeah, so no cylinders, no single port open mode on the PB3000. But they're bringing a lot of the technology that began with the 16 Ultra series. Being able to use it with the app, and having that DSP tuning that they're using on these, really, really powerful amplifier that's going on. And the control for them now is a completely new design. So this is unique to the 3000 series, the controls on the back. But it does appear that if you want to adjust the EQ or do any of the presets, you're going to have to do that on the app. There doesn't look like there's any way to do that via the physical controls on the backs of the subs anymore.
Okay. But you don't do that a lot.
Not likely. That's usually like a 1 or a 2 time setup thing.
Right,
But
there you go.
again, reliance on the app there going on. But
It's striking how different these two models are sized. Because of that 13-inch driver, a sealed one just seems like a completely different box. It's just
yeah, that's the same driver side by side there. Keep in
It's
mind
like
how
that
much
optical
larger the
illusion.
ported one is.
right. The sealed one looks like a bigger driver because of the dramatic difference in size.
Yeah.
So this was definitely one of those where you're going to want to build that cardboard box before you order it and see where it goes in your room.
But I really suspect that the SB3000 at the $1,000 price point, I think that's going to be a very popular model because
I can imagine so, yeah.
It's hitting that very attractive $999 price point, and then lots of output in a sealed design with 18 hertz extension. That's, I think, going to be pretty attractive.
Yeah, everybody sees those sub 20 hertz numbers and gets really excited.
Yes, they do.
For some reason, you see that 1 in that first digit. So there you go. Moving on with additional news. The SVS Black Friday deal on the discontinued 12 NSD series subwoofers is back. We didn't think there'd be any more stock, but the SB12 NSD is once again available for $400 each, and the PB12 NSD is $500. So that ain't a bad deal.
That was a fantastic and very popular deal last year. I thought that was the end of the stock for those models, but jump on that because
they found the key to the last storage room.
something like that. I mean, this is close to 2000 series level performance at those price points, which in the case of the SB12 NSD is actually less than the SB1000. So very, very attractive.
That 400 is awful tempting as I look at it. $400. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Moving on, Filmstruck, I remember talking to you about that, might return as part of Warner Media's forthcoming streaming service in 2019. And the Criterion channel will also be part of that Warner Media streaming service. But Criterion announced they will be making the Criterion channel available as its own standalone service in spring 2019. So I guess it remains to be seen how this will all shake out, but that's interesting that we so quickly get information about how it may return. And that would make sense.
I mean, once again, like Christopher Nolan seems to have been leading the charge.
Oh.
He's like, I want this service to still be back. And there were some other directors, including Steven Spielberg and that, who weighed in and they're like, yeah, this needs to come back. So seems as though Warner is taking that under advisement. They are going to be launching again. Everybody's going to have their own streaming service, aren't they? But
yes.
Warner Media is apparently preparing to launch their own one in 2019, similar to Disney. So they're like, yep, Filmstruck, bring that part back in. Criterion Channel, they're going to be part of that as well. So it's basically Filmstruck just under a new name. And then Criterion's like, well, we're not going to be at the mercy of anyone else anymore. So the Criterion Channel, if you want that all on its own, they're going to offer it. So
you have to either have a huge catalog like Disney, or you have to offer something special like the quality.
Right. Well, and I mean, Warner does have a huge catalog, so
they do, but they're they're not everything. So I don't know how many different services can and will exist, say several years from now. But that'll be fun to see what happens
Every
there.
channel we had on TV, it's now just going to be a streaming service.
Right. Only we could get to that point. That's how we get individual channels in the future. Instead of the cable company offering you individual channels, you just pick all the individual channels you want and subscribe to them.
Seems like we're heading that way.
I mean, could be. Might end up cheaper. I don't know. Dolby is launching their first purely Dolby branded consumer product, and it's a pair of headphones. The $600 Dolby Dimension Bluetooth headphones come with a magnetic charging dock and include a few interesting features. Since they use Bluetooth, they do not use Dolby Atmos for headphones. Instead, they have other processing built into the headphones themselves, powered by a built-in Snapdragon processor, which basically sounds like the old Dolby headphone processing. Does indeed. That Snapdragon processor is also used for head tracking, which can make it seem as though the sound is coming from a fixed location, even if you turn your head. So a little bit like a VR helmet for your ears.
A little bit, yeah. The idea, of course, is for television or movie watching, you turn your head and the sound still comes from where your television is, not from always
I like that idea. That sounds very cool. With all the processing turned on, battery life is supposed to be 10 hours. With the processing turned off, it should be 15 to 16 hours. So probably, unless you watch an enormous amount of TV, that'll get you a couple of days. Got to get you a couple of days. No one wants to wear headphones for 10 hours at a stretch, so that's not happening.
Would seem a bit much.
Yeah, it would. There's also active noise canceling and Dolby's Life Mix. That just sounds, let's see, which allows in outside sound in 12 steps. Pretty much all control is done via an app, but there are basic touch controls on the headphones themselves, and you can quickly switch between 8 different paired devices. Dolby's aiming less at travel and more at in-home use. Now, the Life Mix is funny because that would seem to me to just be like louvers. Like, how is it? Like, isn't it just like I turn and I open a little hole?
It almost is like electronic louvers, yeah. And
right.
Apparently, like the Verge did an early hands-on, and they're like, yeah, since it doesn't turn down the content when you turn up how much ambient sound gets in, you still can't hear what he's saying to you. So they're like, it's pretty good for like a late night is the baby crying mode because you'll hear that. It's not great for like, can someone talk to me while this is playing in my ears? Because you'll hear that.
I was just thinking, has no one developed a baby monitor that interfaces with your home theater amplifier and mixes it in? Just mixes it in.
We got all this wireless stuff, don't we?
I mean, shouldn't it? That would be amazing. You're watching a movie and all of a sudden in the middle of the movie, the volume goes down a bit and you hear dee-dee-dee and then you're like, oh, well, hit pause.
It would have to be one of those things where Bluetooth devices can connect to more than one source simultaneously, which these do not. But yeah, $600.
That's a lot of dollars.
Exactly inexpensive. Some people were disappointed that it's not Dolby Atmos for headphones, but it is basically the old Dolby headphone thing. They talked about it being like 5.1.2, which is exactly what Dolby Headphone used to do with the Dolby Pro Logic 2Z type up mixing for headphones. So that seems to be what these are, but yeah, I don't know about that price point. Seems a bit high.
Yeah, it seems a bit high, but I do like the idea of head tracking. That is kind of, so if for some reason, like if you're wearing the headphones because you're trying to be quiet, then still being able to move your head in that space and detect where it's supposed to be coming from is kind of cool. So we also have a comment, by the way, from Andy C, who made the multi-sub optimizer software. Wanted to clarify that when setting your optimization options, using as flat as possible is usually fine. Rob misunderstood and described it incorrectly. Holy cow, Rob. There's no way.
It's important. We got to get this right.
Believe it.
Yeah, so Andy made it clear that it's a target curve-based system that is always optimizing for the summed response of all the subwoofers that you are optimizing with the multi-sub optimizer software. So it is not attempting to make each individual sub as flat as possible. It is attempting to make the response as flat as possible in every listening position via the summed response of all the subs. The other option is to essentially measure what is happening at your primary listening seat and make that into the target curve that it is attempting to have be uniform across all of the other seats. So sometimes people have like a particular sound that they've already achieved at their primary listening spot, and they're just like, I want that same sound at all the seats, even though it isn't perfectly linear. So that's the other option. But as flat as possible is the one that most people probably want to use, because then every seat is as flat as it can be. Then, of course, you can apply whatever additional target curve on top of that you want to, but you've started from a position of being as close to uniform as possible. So thank you, Andy, for the clarification, and I'll make sure to mention that going forward.
That makes sense. And now, question.
Question time. I will mention once again, question@avrant.com is the email address you want to send your questions to. Let's kick off.
All right, kicking off from last week, which, you know, there's so many from last week each week. It's really just this week. Samuel C. Samuel owns an Epson 8700 UV projector, and his 100-inch projection screen comes down in front of his 65-inch B6 OLED. Okay. He's found himself watching his projector less and less since he got the OLED, I can imagine. But he'd love a huge 4K HDR experience, so he's thinking it's time to upgrade his projector. His budget is $3,000, so he was considering the Epson 5040 UB. The newer 4010 just came out, as well as its sister Pro Cinema 4050 model, would those be better than the 5040 UB? And should he wait for Black Friday, which is very soon, or now if you're listening to this on Black Friday?
Yes, that's right.
So
no, the newer 4010 and its sister, the Pro Cinema 4050, they are not better than the 5040 UB. They both still have the limitation of if you're watching 4K and 4K and HDR, that you're limited to 24 hertz, just like the 5040 UB is, so no advantage there. And the 5040 UB still has the deeper black levels and the higher contrast. So no reason to go with one of those newer models. We are waiting for the 5050 UB.
Okay.
Which in Europe, there was a German outlet that I found that is saying they're expecting it actually to release in early 2019. So I'm thinking CES 2019, early in the year. That is when that's going to come out, because I was a little bit surprised the 5050 UB wasn't officially announced at CEDIA, but it wasn't. And yeah, that German outlet was saying early 2019. So I'm thinking CES. So that would be a little bit of a wait for that if you're going to do that.
What do we suspect the differences will be there between that?
Well, they've already announced in Europe, over there it's called the TW9400 instead of the 5050 UB like it will be in North America. Sure. But they already announced that it will have the 18 gigabits per second HDMI inputs that can accept 4K and HDR at 60 frames per second, which is like the one thing that the 5040 UB didn't do.
Okay. All right.
So that's, I mean, really not much else has changed. Price point basically stays the same. Very little change otherwise. So yeah, that would sort of be the go-to model with a suggested retail price under $3,000. And if you're willing to wait for that, I would definitely consider waiting for the 5050 UB. If you're fine with 4K and HDR being limited to 24 frames per second, the 5040 UB is still a great choice. And we're seeing that down at $2,300 right now. Now, there's one other one. Actually, I heard Sam, I'm pretty sure it was Sam, asked this question of the HT guys as well, and I didn't like the HT guys' response. So
here's the better response, Sam.
Well, they mentioned a Sony that was above his budget, and they mentioned a JVC, which was JVC's like one DLP model, and they thought it was a liquid crystal on silicon model because it was JVC, but it's not. It was JVC's one DLP model, which is not nearly as good. So there is a JVC, but I'm going to tell you to go back a model year, or in fact, back 2 model years at this point, because you can get the RS420, which was also known as the X570. That model you can get for just under $3,000. So you are going back 2 model years at this point, because now there's the NX5, or the RS1000. Those are the sister models. Those are the new genuine 4K panels. Last year it was the X590 or the RS440.
But those aren't $3,000 jobs. Those are
over $3,000.
Yeah.
But if you get back to the RS420/X570, those ones you can find for $3,000, and it's not even close. All right. It's all about native contrast. It's all about being able to put up black and bright at exactly the same time on the screen at exactly the same time. No dynamic iris involved.
Right.
The native contrast of the JVC projectors is so much better than anything else that, yeah.
Than even the upcoming Epson.
Even than the upcoming Epson. Because the upcoming Epson is still an LCD projector.
Right.
And it's native panel contrast. I mean, in order to get contrast similar to the claimed figures of the RS420, it has to use a dynamic iris. Right. So that means, it's great when it's like almost completely black. It can close down the iris. But if you have it almost completely black and a super bright object at the exact same time,
which sort of defeats the purpose of HDR.
HDR, that's right. So yeah, get the RS420. That's the one you want.
Okay, so you would, if you had $3,000 in his current Epson 8700 UB, you'd say, go now and get the JVC, and that's going to give him the experience he wants more than waiting for the new Epson.
That's what I would do.
There's what you do, and that's your correct answer, Sam. Let's see. Moving down here to Alex. I say moving down here as if the audience is over my shoulder watching me scroll. Don't know why I say that. Moving on to Alex. Alex got a UHD-friendly optical drive and made his first MKV backup of the Ultra HD Blu-ray release of The Matrix. He played it in Plex on his NVIDIA Shield on his LG B7 OLED. I'm impressed I know what all those things are. The image looks way too dark. And we have examples that he has given us of what he means by way too dark. And yeah, that's way too dark.
Well, not only, so I mean, this first example, you're like, I'm not totally sure. But then you see Morpheus's face, and that is way too dark on the shield. It is not supposed to look like that.
Right. You can sort of make out that there's a cheekbone in there somewhere. And then the other one is exactly what you expect. If he plays the physical disc using his Xbox One S, or if he uses Plex on an Apple TV 4K or the built-in app on his OLED, the image looks correct. So it only seems to be the NVIDIA Shield that is darkening the image, and any other apps on the NVIDIA Shield like Kodi or VLC also look too dark. So this seems to be a hardware issue. Any ideas on what settings might fix this problem? I don't know enough about the NVIDIA Shield. Do you?
Yeah, I've got one, and I have a B7 OLED. So I don't have the Ultra HD Blu-ray of The Matrix, so I don't have the source material to test to get to simulate these exact results. But there's a few things I suspect. So I'll start with what is hopefully the simple answer, because if you go into the NVIDIA Shield's settings. So at the moment, we're leaving the OLED alone and going into the NVIDIA Shield settings, and you go to its HDMI settings. There is a thing in there called dynamic range. Now, most people might see a setting like dynamic range and think, oh, I don't want a limited dynamic range.
Right, I want amazing maximum dynamic range.
So there's auto, limited, and full.
Mm-hmm.
If you set it to full, the image might look a lot like this, because... That's counterintuitive.
This
is not the audio dynamic range that we're talking about. This is the video dynamic range. And in video, we're actually supposed to be using the values. So just going back to like 8-bit video when the values were between 0 and 255. Well, all the values from 0 to 16 are below black. And the values from 235 to 255 are above white.
Right.
When you set the HDMI output dynamic range to limited, that's what it does. It sets black to 16.
So it's crushing everything below 16 above 235?
Yeah, so now when it's sending out... if you've set the dynamic range to full, that's what you would do with like a computer's RGB signal, where it doesn't have below black and above white. So... I don't know, because this image of Morpheus looks worse than if you did that. But then again,
it looks impossibly bad. It's just
that was a camera off of his screen, so it's possible that the exposure of the camera made that image look worse. Yeah, so I'm hoping that's what it is, because that's a simple fix. If it is, right, that's simply going into the HDMI output setting, going into the dynamic range, and setting it either to auto or to limited. And I could very well see someone having set it to full, because intuitively would think, I want the full dynamic range, don't I?
You would feel
but
that.
In video, you do not.
Yeah, let me tell you, that whole super blacks and super whites for 8-bit video has driven me personally insane with digitizing old videotapes.
Yeah.
Because I did not know why everything looked too contrasty and some stuff were too dark and too bright. I didn't understand until finally, after just reading, I came upon the answer and came upon some techniques to correct for that. And now I can post old videos that look fantabulous.
Yes. Now, there is a more complicated possibility. If you were... So he said he had everything going through an AV receiver in his email, so it should be just one HDMI output going from his receiver into his television. But I don't recall exactly if he was using a computer or a home theater PC, because if he was, it's possible that he set on his OLED now, so not on the NVIDIA Shield, but on the OLED settings, he might have gone into its input setup and changed that to the PC input. I don't know if he did, but he might have. If he was connecting a computer, he very well might have. Now, if he has done that, that could be an issue. Because now the NVIDIA Shield would be expecting to send out an RGB signal. It's going to detect that the LG OLED is essentially in PC mode, awaiting an RGB signal. And we're going to end up with this similar problem where it's sending out the full dynamic range because it has defaulted to RGB output. So if that's the case, if you set the LG's input to its PC mode, you would want to go into the NVIDIA Shield, and instead of using its auto detect for resolution and color, you would want to go into the manual settings and you would want to set it to YCBCR at 10-bit output And when you do so, the only option will be with 420 chroma subsampling. It's a lot of weird numbers, but that's what you're looking for. YCBCR output, 10-bit 420. You do that, it should look correct.
All right. And I have learned what color subsampling is lately because that came up too.
Chroma subsampling.
Yeah, I've learned that 422 is sufficient.
So, Alex, I hope that solves the issue because, yeah, Morpheus should definitely not look that dark in the shadows.
All right. So, yes, it's one of those two things. Moving along, Christian S. and Damien D. together in one question.
I have combined them because they are very similar questions.
Very similar questions. Christian and Damien, listen up. Christian thinks it's time for a new TV. It's always time for a new TV, isn't it? He sits 8.5 feet away, so he thinks a 65-inch size will be just fine. That's almost exactly my distance, and I can tell you, yes, 65 is beautiful. His room is dim, but not pitch black. Same here. He watches lots of sports and movies, and he plays games, and is miffed that his PS4 Pro doesn't play Ultra HD Blu-rays. Can we convince him that a Vizio P-Series is not the right choice? Is an OLED really going to be worth $1,000 more? Now, I'm going to guess what Rob's going to say, because Rob and I have talked about how really OLED is the best. This is just as good as it gets today in picture quality. And so
it is. Yeah.
It is. That's a lot. I know $1,000 is a lot of money, but it reminds me of back in the day when I bought my first high-def TV, and it was like, oh, should I plunk down that extra $1,000 for this plasma? And yes, I should. Because it really was worth it.
So my answer has actually been distilled down to I've basically polarized it. I'm like, either you get an OLED or you get a Vizio P series. Or on Black Friday, if you want to land right in the middle, maybe you get a Vizio P series Quantum.
Okay.
Because those have a Black Friday sale price of $1,500, which lands like right in the middle. But I'm basically like, it's either those two extremes, because on Black Friday, the Vizio P series in 65 inches is going to be $900. So the difference is even more than $1,000. And I'm like, getting anything in between those. So interestingly, this isn't just me saying it. If you go to CNET, where David Katzmeyer, my favorite TV reviewer, he's put up his list of the best TVs. If you go to Ratings, which spells R-Tings.
R-Tings, yes.
And they've got their whole recommended list of the best overall 4K televisions. They're like OLED at the top, number one.
Yep.
And then they're like, okay, there's the LCD alternatives, but they've both picked as the best possible LCD the Vizio P series Quantum. Or they're like, get a Vizio P series because it's by far the highest value. So it's sort of this, like, we've just separated it. It's like either you're going to get the best there is, which is going to be an OLED, or you're going to go for the maximum value, which is the Vizio P series, or on Black Friday, the P series Quantum lands in the middle. And that is basically the best LCD that's out there. Now they're like, okay, there's the Samsung Q9 FN. Right up there with the Vizio P series Quantum, but it's actually more expensive than OLEDs. So
yeah, don't do
that. Doesn't make much sense. There's the Sony X900F, which is like, if you want to talk about being in the middle, it's like it is in the middle. It's in the middle price wise at about $1,600, and it's in the middle performance wise, as in it's not the best out of any of them, but it's not the worst out of any of them. It's like so in every facet, it's like right in the middle. So by and large, I would say like the Vizio P series is close enough to that X900F that I'd rather save on the case of Black Friday, $700 and go with the Vizio P series. So can I convince you that the Vizio P series is not the right choice? Do you want to spend $2,200 or do you want to spend $900? Because that is by far to me, a significant enough price gap that if someone's like, you know what, $2,200 is just too much, I'm going to spend $900. I'm like, yeah. That's totally
I mean, can't blame you there. It just depends on why are you buying this TV and how will it sit well with you knowing there's a little bit more picture quality.
Because I seriously question spending $1,500 or $1,600 versus $2,200. Again, that's a pretty significant amount of money, but the jump in performance there is worth it to me. I'm like, so either get a Vizio P series or get an OLED. I say nowhere in between.
And it's performance, and I told you about my whole thing about viewing angle. I can't stand, if I slide off to the side, I can't stand seeing that picture quality drop off. And every LCD does it, so that's another thing. If you've got people that are going to sit way off to the side, I'd go get the OLED myself. All right. And another part of the question, if he were going to spend so much on an OLED, is the slightly more expensive LG C8 worth it over the B8? I don't think the picture quality is different, is it? Or is the newer one ever so slightly better processing?
That's right. They've got slightly different processors. The B8 has the Alpha 7 processor, which is basically the same as the 2017 models, and the C8 and E8 and W8 all use the Alpha 9 processor, which is a little bit more powerful. Effectively, what are the differences? Okay, they have some calibration differences for professional calibrators using SpectraCal. As an end user, you're probably not going to care about that very much. So there's like two features. The C8, E8, and W8, they can do gradation smoothing. So if you're super duper bothered by any sort of potential color banding ever, they have the option. It's hidden within the MPEG noise reduction setting for some reason. Okay. But if you turn that to low, it'll activate the gradation smoothing. The B8 doesn't have that. The other one is they can all accept 120 hertz inputs if you're sending it 1080p at 120 hertz, which PC gamers and Xbox One X users might choose to do. If you do that, the C8 and up can take 1080p at 120 hertz with HDR. The B8 can take 1080p at 120 hertz, but it can't take HDR.
Okay, so a little bit of possible future proofing there for the little more money. A little bit. I see. Yeah. And specifically for gamers, I would think.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. So do you really want that color? But now the other thing is, how much more expensive are they? Now, the full retail price, the C8 is about $200 more than the B8. But if you find the lowest prices that are out there, they're both about $2,150 or $2,200, at which point maybe you just go for the C8, because why the heck not if they're basically the same price?
Yeah, once you're there at that price range, it's probably okay to do that.
Again, going back to ratings and CNET, they both put the B8 at the top because they're like, hey, if you can save $200, overall the picture quality is so similar that it isn't worth spending more.
Right. You know, what's interesting, though, is different people have different pet peeves about picture quality. And so if you happen to have noticed banding, and, you know, I gotten used to it on a plasma TV over the years, but it's there. You know, if you're seeing a beautiful blue sky gradation from light blue to dark blue, you'll still see those. It looks artificial. And so maybe if that drives you crazy, it's worth the money.
Yeah. If you want gradation smoothing, then it'll be worth it to you.
So here we go. Damien's related question. Damien knows we'd put an OLED at the top of our flat panel recommendation list. Yes. But he has a ton of ambient light during the day, and he says his kids are notorious for pausing a game and leaving it for hours. Children.
Yeah.
Plus he wants a 65-inch size for under $1,500. So all of that is pointing him towards an LCD TV. Yeah, I guess, sure. He's got
now. To me, the ambient light thing isn't. Again, I'm going to harp on that. LCD or OLED is plenty bright, even when you have ambient light.
Yes.
But the other thing is the potentially pausing a game for hours on end. Yeah, it would really suck to get burned in on your OLED. And for 65 inches for under $1,500. Yep. You got to go LCD.
And Damien has sent a picture, and I'm thinking that 65-inch TV, I hope he understands, going to hang over both of those windows. It's going to.
It would look like, that doesn't look like a 65-incher right now.
65-incher. I can tell by the size of the components underneath it. So, you know, the TV,
it's going to be pretty close. The TVs these days has such thin frames and bezels that.
Yeah, but it's going to come up just a little bit into the clock. That's about it. Yeah, always measure TVs. I did cut out large pieces of paper and tape up a size just to make sure of what I could do. Damien's got friends who are going to want advice about which TVs are a good deal, and none of them are going to be looking at OLED price ranges unless it's easy to get a 65-inch OLED for $1,500 now. Is it?
No.
Not quite. We ain't there yet. I wish we were.
$2,150. That's about the best I can find these days.
Right. But hey, if you're ready to spend $1,500, what's another $650? To me, plunk it down, man. Come on, save up and go for the gusto. I mean, I really kind of mean that. I mean, to me, if I'm ready to spend $1,500, I'm kind of ready to spend $2,100. And I'm not ready to spend $5,000 or $4,000.
No,
but $1,500 to $2,100 is not the end of the world in my.
That's how I ended up with like $900. 2,100 and nowhere in between.
Exactly. Now, yeah, if you have a limit at 1,500, I'd say drop down to that 900.
There is that.
And go ahead and get the LCD that you know they're probably going to get. First of all, if they want advice, they need to listen to the podcast. first of all. But yeah, I bet you what they need is the $900 Vizio.
Well, that's just, I mean, he basically wants a good, better, best list. And that, I mean, it's pretty easy. Vizio P Series, good. Yeah. Vizio P Series Quantum, better, and right around $1,500 on Black Friday. If you can find any stock, they're going to sell out in a second. Yeah. And then OLED is best. And now, is there an alternative to that OLED up at the top? Yeah, I would say like the Samsung Q8 FN, if you are a super duper heavy gamer, and that is your number one priority, I could absolutely see getting a Q8 FN from Samsung instead of an OLED, because the Samsungs have the variable refresh rate. They've got the superb anti-reflective coating. So in his situation where tons of ambient light, you might justify that. And of course, no chance of burn-in on the Samsung. So I could see that as an alternative up in that $2,000 plus price range.
Right. That's why it's so important to find out what you're going to do with the television and where it's going.
Yes. But otherwise, I would say OLED. And the P Series Quantum, the one complaint people have about that is it's got color banding and it doesn't have any gradation smoothing. If you want a TV that isn't quite as good, I mean, the contrast, it's not even a competition. Like the native contrast of the panel on the P Series Quantum is right up there with the flagship level Samsungs. And then with its very good local dimming, it's like 15,000 to 1, while everyone else is down at like 8,000 to 1. So the P Series Quantum is right up there, but if the color banding really bothers you and you're willing to take a hit on the contrast, well, Sony with that X900F, which is right in the middle of everything, price-wise and performance-wise, it has really good gradation smoothing. So that's the middle choice, P Series Quantum or Sony X900F, and then you got the Vizio P Series as the good. You suppose the TCL 600 series is in there as well.
I didn't like TCLs. I looked at them. Didn't like them.
I mean, the Vizio P Series is above that one. So, yeah, that's the good, better, best. It's actually gotten quite simple at the end of the year here.
Right. There's a reason everybody's sort of converging in these two directions. I say everybody, yourself and some Artings people and some other folks. You know, people are starting to notice there's these two ways to go with it.
Yeah.
Jorge got an NVIDIA Shield to run Plex and a Denon AVR X4400H all on our advice. He says they're fantastic, and he's loving that he can use the full lossless audio tracks on his Ultra HD Blu-ray backups. That's great. He wanted to give Atmos a go, and in his setup, front heights and top middles would make the most sense using on-wall, on-ceiling speakers. But then his friend gave him 2 pairs of Sony SS-CSE upward-firing Atmos modules. That's kind of where I wanted to start with, was the upward firing Atmos modules. Jorge doesn't really have any interest in using an up firing configuration. So can he mount these Sony speakers in the front height and top middle positions and use them as regular on ceiling speakers? Can they only be used as up firing? Will the built-in angle make them useless as top middles? I would think you could slap them wherever you wanted to.
You absolutely can. In fact, on Sony's own website for these very speakers, they show the configuration options, and one of them is like, use them as front heights on the wall or on the ceiling. So on the back of these speakers, there is a keyhole mount. Now that's on the back. So that is what you would use if you were still using them in an upward firing configuration, but you didn't have speakers to put them on top of. You could mount them to the wall, still up firing using that keyhole mount, but they come with an additional keyhole mount that screws into the bottom of them, at which point now you can use that to mount them to the wall or to the ceiling.
There you go.
So they not only can be, they are in fact built and meant to be. So no problem at all, Jorge. Feel free to mount them wherever you would like. You do not have to use them as upward firing, although they can be.
There's one thing I've learned from being a part of this podcast is that there's nothing magic or special about upward firing speakers. They're not doing it. Like I suggested, wouldn't it make sense to have them be very directional so they bounce off the right spots on the ceiling? But I think, Rob, you've told me that not necessarily. That's really not what's going on.
I mean, they are playing mostly high frequencies and using a single larger driver, which inherently makes them more directional. Then I really think it's pretty much all down to the processing that happens when you tell your AV receiver that you're using Atmos modules and not actual front height and top middle speakers.
When you say upward firing modules to your receiver says, gotcha, and it does have a little special something for it.
But the speaker
itself is not specifically an upward firing speaker. So
yeah, so he was worried about it's got this built-in angle. Is that going to be a problem as top middles? No, it really isn't. Mount them essentially wherever you please. The angle is not so much that it's really going to greatly affect what happens there. So if you want to put them slightly in front of you and have them angled back towards you, that'd be fine. If you want to put them out to the sides and have them angled in slightly towards your seats, that would also be fine. If you want to put them slightly behind you and angled down at you, but all of it is fine.
Say thank you to your friend and put them wherever you please. Anywhere you want. All right, some actual new questions for this week. Sean W. is our first new question for this week. Sean has pretty much decided to buy a 65-inch LG OLED. We've been talking about those a lot. He wants to buy an Ultra HD Blu-ray player too, so he'd like to know which model we recommend most highly. Best Buy announced their Black Friday deals, and the Sony X700 and LG UBK90 look like they'll be the least expensive 4K players at $150 or so that can do Dolby Vision. There are also Samsung models on sale, and the Sony X800 will be $200. He knows the Panasonic UB820 is kind of like the new Oppo at $500, but is there really any benefit for him if he spends that much? He does still want good upscaling for 1080p, Blu-rays, so what should he get?
Yeah, I wish this were
to go to the $500 price range. That's really what we're asking, right?
I mean, overall, no, but with the caveat of that's going to come with some minor inconveniences. I wish there were a super good, this is the one easily to get answer, but unfortunately, everything has some little quibbles with it that I've got.
That's true for a lot of things, yes.
So the X700, $150, great price point. It does support Dolby Vision. It is the Wirecutter's pick as their go-to Ultra HD Blu-ray player.
So it has good apps.
Yeah, I do tend to agree with the Wirecutter on most things, including this. The thing that annoys everybody who uses this is that in order to use Dolby Vision, you must manually toggle Dolby Vision on in the player. And when you do, now, even if the signal is not Dolby Vision, it still sends out a thing that puts your TV into Dolby Vision mode.
That's frustrating.
Yeah, so it's not automatic Dolby Vision on and off.
So that would literally screw up a non-Dolby Vision encoded movie.
Yes, it would.
That's very bad.
That is really annoying.
Okay, so don't buy that.
The LG is the alternative at the same price point, and it has a thing where once you set its frame rate, and you can choose 60 frames per second or 24 frames per second, everything comes out at that frame rate. It doesn't automatically switch frame rates, which for the most part isn't a problem because almost everything is 24 frames per second on disc anyway. But again, just weird that these really basic auto-detecting things aren't in these players.
Well, do these players, so these players, like the LG you just mentioned, that you have to set it to either 60 or 24 or whatever, that player has apps in it that would view other things like Netflix?
Well, the LG's real, I mean, technically it has a Netflix app and one other thing, but they're essentially useless.
Okay, so
the Sony is okay on that front. So, I mean, what would he be getting with a $500 820? Well, it would automatically switch into Dolby Vision. It would automatically switch frame rates.
There you go.
You don't... I mean, it's really hard to justify because with an LG OLED, you don't need its HDR processing. Not that you couldn't use it. You know, it would allow your OLED to not have to tone map everything, but you got the two options. Either it's Dolby Vision, where there's dynamic metadata in the signal anyway, that works, or the LG OLED has its own active HDR. When it's HDR10, it has its own dynamic tone mapping. So you don't really need the dynamic tone mapping duplicated in the Panasonic to begin with.
Right.
The LG OLED already has that in there. So it's really hard to justify spending $500. But is the hassle of having to manually toggle Dolby Vision on and off going to annoy you to no end? Now, you could go with Sony's X800.
Was about to ask that. Yeah.
It doesn't do Dolby Vision. But... like I say, the LG OLED has that dynamic tone mapping on HDR10, which looks great.
Okay.
So how important is it to you that your TV goes into Dolby Vision mode? Are you willing to do it manually on the X700? Are you willing to... I mean, I can't recommend... The LG is like Tinker Toy quality, build quality. I hate those things. They shimmy and shake and look like they're going to fall apart. And they're held together with like two screws. They're terrible. So... I don't know. X700 seems like the choice, but there's the There's no really great choice. I'm almost tempted to
Why
say
do they all suck?
I know. I'm pretty much tempted to say get an X800 and just don't even worry about Dolby Vision because you're getting an LG OLED that does dynamic tone mapping. I know that's a crazy answer, but...
Well, no, that makes sense because the LG OLED can't... Am I correct that it can't do that full 1,000 nits yet?
Oh, it can't do 1,000 nits anyway.
Right.
No.
Okay, so it kind of has to do its own thing with whatever you send it anyway.
But, I mean, Dolby has worked hand in hand with them, so the Dolby Vision mapping is really, really good. But
I wonder if you just...
The dynamic tone mapping's really good.
Yeah, I just wonder if a regular person would see any real difference between Dolby Vision. Yeah, so if your answer is, oh no, then don't worry about it, dude. Get that X800 just get that.
Way better build quality, better apps.
But you know what's funny is to sit here and sort of halfway admit that Dolby Vision isn't really necessary. I'm
a little bit cheesed at that. I mean, it's so much has happened that I'd rather have a TV do good dynamic tone mapping. I'd rather it do that.
Yeah. You know what? I'm starting to think about it that way. Interesting. Yeah. Dolby Vision not necessary? ? Okay, well, there you go. There's your answer. Just let your TV do what it knows how to do well and get a decent Sony X800. In the current Harmony remote lineup, there's the Harmony Companion and the more expensive Harmony Elite. But before the Elite came out, there was the Harmony Ultimate. I can't even remember which one we have. Once again, looking at deals, would the Harmony Ultimate plus Hub be worth it over the Harmony Companion if they're close to the same price? Now, the little Harmony we have doesn't have any touchscreen. Okay, you have it on the screen.
Then you have the Companion, or it might have been the Smart Control, which was the predecessor to the Companion.
Really, it looks an awful lot like the one you're showing now. I guess it's the Companion because it's a non-screen remote and it has a little hub that blasts you in the face with infrared that you can't see. But you know it's doing it, and that's what weirds me out. Is I just know that that's it just, I don't know why that freaks me out, that the hub has a really bright light in it that's shining.
It's really bright. If you shoot it with a camcorder, it's blinding. But yeah, so the Harmony Ultimate, I mean, it basically comes down to how much do you want a touchscreen on your remote. That's essentially the answer. If you want a touchscreen and the Ultimate you can get for close to the same price as the Companion, then heck yeah. I mean, the one thing I didn't like about the Ultimate is I didn't like that the transport buttons, your play, pause, fast forward, rewind, that they put those buttons above the touchscreen. I didn't like that. They fixed that with the current Elite model. They put the transport buttons below the touchscreen, and I much prefer that. But that is a pretty small quibble in the grand scheme of things. And the Harmony Ultimate, if you want the touchscreen, I mean, that's your answer. So
is it
you just have to say, how much do I want a touchscreen built in?
Is it true that the touchscreen models you can switch between more components and inputs? Because my little baby Harmony with the hub really just has like 3 choices.
Well, it's 6 because you can long press any of those 3 on the Companion.
That's right.
But that's just for activities built into it. This is the thing I wanted to mention, which is that any of the remotes that use the hub, including the Companion or the Smart Control that did not have touch screens built into the remote itself, you can still use the app on your smartphone.
That's right.
And the app then basically becomes your touch screen and gives you the ability to have an unlimited number of activities.
That's right. But the app is a little wonky and slow. It's not I don't love it. And the other thing I don't like about we recently switched to a Harmony situation in our living room. And the one thing I don't like, I hated the whole thing at first because it is not like old classic programmable remotes where you would make a macro yourself manually and the power button you'd have to put it in a mode.
There are the sequences thing. You can do a sequence within an activity, and that's kind of like a macro.
Kind of. But anyway, so my wife set it up. She set it up because I was mad at it. I don't know how to use this thing. I'm from the 2000s. I can't, so I was angry. But once she got it set up, I kind of started to fall in love with it because it really does switch everything all at once. But there's one caveat. If the DVR is recording something and I switch to my Roku, it tries to turn off the DVR, but
you can change that.
Yeah, but I have yet to figure that out. How to?
Yeah, you have to go into
the Harmony doesn't know. The Harmony doesn't know when the DVR is recording.
Right. You have to go into the devices and tell it in the power settings for your DVR. Don't turn this device off.
Right. Well, I kind of like it off. So I can't decide. That's what I mean. I can't decide, do I want to leave the DVR on all the time, or do I want to have this little weirdness
but
where...
I mean, most DVRs have the thing where if it's in the process of recording and you press the power button, it won't actually turn off. It'll bring up a little thing like, are you sure you want to stop your recording?
Right. But the problem then is when you say I switch to my Roku, I'm watching YouTube stuff, right? And so my DVR sits there waiting for a response about whether or not it should go ahead and turn off. And so it doesn't. It records fine, and that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I hit the off button when I'm ready to go to bed and done with my YouTube stuff. Next day, I come to turn everything on, and it turns the DVR off.
Oh, right.
Because I hit the button.
Power state.
Yeah, because it doesn't know. It doesn't understand.
And you don't have discrete on-off commands for your DVR, because that would solve that.
It's just
it's just a power toggle.
And this is the one thing that drives me insane.
Then just go into the power settings and say never turn my DVR off.
Yeah,
that's what you need to do.
I know, but I like that it turns it off when it works right. Anyway, so that's just my own little
thing. As far as answering, we were talking to, who were we talking to? Sean?
We're talking to Sean.
Yeah, Sean, really it comes down to, do you want the touchscreen built into your remote or not?
There you go. Yeah. Alex P. Alex bought several products and set them up according to our advice. As far as the equipment itself goes, he was initially very happy with his new projection screen, Denon receiver, KEF Q100 speakers, dual SVS PB12 NSD subwoofers, and acoustic treatments. That sounds nice. And he gave us some nice before and after stuff. Okay. But as he spent more time with his setup and listened to more content, he found that everywhere below 500 hertz, he's getting very uneven results. He has installed as many Acoustimass absorption panels and DIY corner bass traps as he can accommodate, but they haven't seemed to have helped very much. He's tried measuring with Room EQ Wizard, but he doesn't know how to fix the, quote, roller coaster results that he's seeing. And those aren't necessarily always as bad as they look on the graph. Below 80 hertz, he's got pretty good output, but the frequency response is kind of all over the place with some big peaks and dips at all of his various seating positions. Multi-EQ XT32 did help a little, but it certainly didn't make things great. His bigger issue is between 80 and 300 hertz. His center and surround speakers look fine, but his front, left, right speakers and his subs show a big drop in output in that upper bass region. So for music, he isn't hearing a satisfying low end or kick drum. He says it's so plainly audible that he actually bought some Klipsch reference Premier towers and center, thinking the small KEF Q100s just lacked the necessary output and extension. But the change in speakers didn't solve the issue. So it definitely seems to be due to room acoustics and setup. Interesting. The only thing he's tried that has increased his upper bass output has been physically moving forward so that he is in a listening position a couple of feet in front of his couch. But he can't permanently move his seating forward because doing so would block walkways. I understand that. And he's got some after pictures. All right, so we've got a map,
a diagram, so that we can see the handy things. Yep.
Right. I mean, my first thought is like placement of speakers, and can you get more response? Or my other, before we continue on, I'm thinking take everything out and start adding room treatments gradually. You know what I mean? Like, see what it's like with everything reflective and none of your bass traps, and then just start adding one thing at a time and see what it does. But it would take a while. But
well, yeah, I'm along similar lines because I wish there were a simpler answer to give you here, Alex, but this is going to require some time on your part. Right. I definitely don't think you need to buy anything. In fact, I recall that he did ask me about buying the Klipsch reference Premier speakers, but he did so on Twitter, and he was just asking, will these allow me to have more output from the same amplifier?
That's
at which point
sure. Yeah.
My answer was like, yeah, they absolutely will, but they didn't fix his problem because he didn't let me know with that Twitter conversation that it was really this only one region. And so I wish we had sort of been able to talk about this before he had spent money, because I really don't think it's the Q100 speakers. In fact, he doesn't think it's the Q100 speakers anymore either. And what you kind of need to do is really just start with one speaker, one front speaker in the proper front left or front right position, and you in your seat. And you need to play the sweeps. And I mean, I'm going to take this first because later on I'm going to get into a little bit more complicated potential solution. But I would start with the just using my ears solution. and not worrying about measurements, because I would want to play a sweep through just my front left speaker, where the front left speaker should be, and me and where I want to be seated. And I want to hear what that sweep is producing.
So do you want to turn off all room equalization that's already happened?
Everything. Everything
flat.
off.
Everything back to default, flat completely.
Yeah. And I just want to hear what that one speaker is doing all by itself. And it sounds as though in this 80 to 300 hertz range, he's probably going to have an issue there. And we would expect that like substantial bass trapping. Now, he's put in some pretty big corner bass traps. He's got one that's up sort of towards his ceiling in the at the back of his room there. Yeah. But the rest of the room doesn't really have what we would call bass trapping. The other panels that he's installed there are the thinner panels that are, great for dialogue intelligibility, but they don't really have much of an impact on the deeper bass that we're talking about. Because 80 to 300 hertz is definitely bass. And
definitely
the acoustic treatments aren't going to have a tremendous amount of effect there. So if you listen to just the one speaker, and I would want to listen to just my front left, and I would want to listen to just my front right, and play that sweep, and you discover that they are having a serious issue just all by themselves in that 80 to 300 hertz range. Well, it's difficult to say, oh, you should be crossing your front, left, right speakers over to your subs at 300 hertz, which isn't even an option, but 250 hertz could be. And that is too high. That's
too high, yeah.
That's going to start giving you very localizable subwoofers if you cross over at 250 hertz. So it means that if that's what they're doing on their own, and the only solution is moving your seat, and you can't move your seat, then we will have to go into the more complicated solution, which I will get to a little bit later. But I want to see what they're doing first, because it's entirely possible that everything he's experiencing right now is not just what his front left speaker does by itself, or just what his front right speaker does by itself.
What they do together.
What they do together, and what they do in combination with his subwoofers. Because the subwoofers don't just stop like a brick wall at 80 hertz. They do continue to play up to at certainly 160, and there's still output going on up at 320 hertz. Those 2 octaves, there's still output. And that could be the issue. So it's really important to know, what is my speaker doing all by itself? Because if the speaker all by itself is able to play down to, let's say you can only get down to 120 hertz before the speaker all by itself starts to have
But you'll still see a drop off, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. I'd be okay crossing a front speaker over at 120 hertz. Above that, probably not. But that could be a solution. So it's important that you do that first, Alex. You got to hear what your speaker does all by itself. And we can't really... So actually, you may as well say the first question, because we can answer that right away.
Right. Yeah. Because he's thought of installing carpet, or trying to somehow add more absorption panels, but will either of these things address these bass issues? Either the uneven deep bass below 80 hertz, or the deficient upper bass between 80 and 300. Not necessarily, but again, I just, coming at it from a very scientific standpoint, I'd want everything to default. If, in case some of this bass trapping is at fault, I'd want to take it out. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the carpet won't do a thing. So
the carpet's not going to do anything. No.
Below 80 hertz, none of your passive absorption panels are going to do a thing. So
is the size and shape of his room doing anything in this range of bass?
Well, yeah. I mean, the size and shape of your room is always going to do something to the bass.
I mean, specifically 80 to 300,
I mean, it certainly could be. He does have this, off. It's not a symmetrical placement. It's not a rectangular room. And I can't recall offhand if he has a door either at the bottom or the top of his stairs. Because if this is open, right? If the stairway is open, then that is completely altering what's going on in the bass as well. So, yeah, I suspect it's the combination of the speakers and the subwoofers, actually, as opposed to just the speaker by itself. But it could be. But when it's over that much of a frequency range, that's a good 2 octaves that we're talking about. When that much of the frequency range is being affected, that's usually got to be some kind of wave interaction, not just the direct sound from only the speaker itself. So that brings us, you might as well read the question.
Yeah,
we'll dig into the whole thing.
His other ideas, he's considered rotating his entire setup 90 degrees so that his projection screen would be on what is currently his left wall, but that would be a huge hassle. Sounds like it. This room is used by everybody to enter the house, since the door to the garage is on what is currently the right wall. Okay, that's that door. With his current setup, that right side is open since his theater setup is all pushed over to the left, leaving an open path from the door to the stairs. But if you rotate the setup 90 degrees, now the door would be on the theater's back wall, and people would have to walk by the seats to get to the stairs. Also, he would need to hire an electrician to run cables and power to a ceiling position for his projector, since he wouldn't be able to use a rear shelf anymore. Yeah, that's a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
And I don't see how that would make a difference.
Well, I mean, like he said, because he did the experiment of moving his seat forward, and that made a difference. Yeah. But again, that's making me suspect it's the combination of subwoofer and speakers.
Yeah. Anyway, his wife is already pretty fed up with him spending money and messing with the theater setup. So he's only into this rotating the whole room idea if it's really the only way to fix things. Those are his ideas. So how does he fix this? And we're already starting to talk about that.
Yeah. Like I say, if you listen to just the speakers by themselves and you discover, they can actually play down to 120 hertz without this huge problem just by itself. Now we know it's the combination of the subwoofers and speakers that is essentially at fault. Now, just doing it by ear.
You know what you could do, by the way, if you want to, you could just buy some cheaper speaker wires and run the two speakers 90 degrees around the room just to see, like if you listen to your two speakers without the subwoofer and they're still sounding weird and you're like, how already am I having, move it around, just those two speakers, see if it does anything different on the other wall. That wouldn't be too hard to do. Moving the whole thing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Just especially with the Q100s that he's not even using right now.
Right,
a couple of small bookshelf speakers he could move. Yeah, so yeah, I agree with that. And actually, I was going to suggest a similar thing when it comes to the subwoofer, because I would actually, as odd as this is going to sound, because he's gone to dual subs based on our advice, done a lot of the things that we've said to do, but I would have you do a subwoofer crawl. Because I would first want to see what the heck is going on with just one subwoofer in your primary seat. And you take yourself to the locations where your front, left, and right speakers are and get that reciprocal. What is going on with just the subwoofer? And then I would want to have you play the sweeps with the subwoofer and the speaker both active. And that's with the subwoofer, oddly enough, in your seat and the speaker where it should be. And you go over by the speaker.
You go where the sub was.
Well, not even where the sub was. You go where the speaker is.
Okay.
And you're going to see, because what we're worried about is what is going on between your seat and the location of your front speaker. So I would have you do this very odd subwoofer crawl, because that is going to confirm for you 100% that it's the combination of the location, the subwoofer, and the speaker, as opposed to just the speaker and the seating location without the subwoofer in the picture. So if we confirm all that, now we come to the challenge of, okay, he doesn't have limitless placement opportunities for his dual subs. He's basically put them in the places where they can go. And that means you're going to have to use the multi-sub optimization software.
Right.
You really do. That's the only way to come at this.
By the way, he shows his subs both to the left and to the right of his seating position.
That's right.
Like maybe slightly behind him to the left. So one's very close to the left and one's very far away to the right. Now, I've always understood it's better to go diagonally across the room.
Yes, you do if you can. You want to go diagonally, but it doesn't look like he has the opportunity. He's worried about blocking walkways and aesthetics are a concern. So he's like, he's pretty much got them where he can put them. So when that's the situation, and so he can't move the seat, he can't move the subs, he can't move the speakers. All you can do at that point is the multi-sub optimizer software. And it does have the capability to essentially treat the low end of your speakers as though they were another sub. And get you the crossover between speakers and dual subwoofers to get you as flat response as you can. Because that is all that is left to you at this point. Now, it's going to mean you need a mini DSP. There's no way around it. You're going to have to get a mini DSP. So your wife is already pretty fed up. I'm talking about spending some time. I'm talking about disconnecting speakers and listening to just one speaker. I'm talking about possibly doing a subwoofer crawl. That is messing around with the room some more.
You need to do all this while she's away.
Something like that. And it's going to mean spending $95 on a mini DSP in the end.
Yeah.
But it really is the only solution to your issue. I can't tell you that rotating the room is 100% going to fix this for you.
Right.
I can suspect
I can't
that.
Imagine.
I can suspect it'll change it. All right. Yeah. I can tell you it'll change it, but you might just end up with a whole new set of problems.
Right. See, I would, for me, the first thing I would do is just change position of speakers, start with the speakers without the sub, listen to sweeps, change their positions, bring them towards you, move them away, just to see if we're talking about a placement issue.
Yeah.
And then plug the subwoofers back in, move them a little bit. He's got some room to move the sub. Take it forward a little bit, looking at his diagram.
Possibly. Yeah.
Or move just one forward a little bit. And there's all these kind of, if he hasn't done that, moving speakers around and trying sweeps and stuff is definitely the first place to start before you go moving the whole room.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. 100% agree with that. But yeah, ultimately, I think you're going to have to invest in a mini DSP. At least it's not extravagantly expensive. Maybe that's your Christmas present. Nice $95 Christmas
stocking
present.
Stuffer.
Mini DSP and the multi-sub optimization software, including essentially treating the low end of your speakers as another sub. That's the way you're going to have to come at this.
Tell us what your process is. I mean, I'm curious to know how you step through this, what you try first, second, and third, because that's a frustrating problem to have.
It is.
Moving on now to Chris H. First up, Chris wrote to us previously about his dialogue intelligibility problems using his ELAC debut series speakers. We identified his center speaker being above and behind his TV and not angled down, plus his seat being right back against his closet doors with no absorption behind his head as being the likely culprits. He made 3 DIY absorption panels using Roxol insulation to start. He hasn't even covered them with any sort of fabric yet, so he just wanted to place them to hear for himself if they would make any difference. Yeah, that's smart. So with one panel behind his head, one on the right wall, and one straddling a corner as a bass trap, he found that his intelligibility issues are almost completely fixed. Yes. Big improvement. So he's going to make some more panels. Now he's going to go panel crazy. He's going to make more panels to go on his left wall. There's going to be panels everywhere. And on his front wall behind his speakers. And he'll get them covered in material to make them look nice. He's very happy and thanks us for our advice on that one. And he has sent some nice looking pictures that shows where he's testing these panels at and what that looks like. Yeah, I could just picture Chris is going to go insane with panels and check in with him like 6 months from now.
It sounds like maybe 3. He's built 3 and maybe 3 more. So that's
he's going to love it. He's going to put it in every room. And eventually his family's going to be like, why can't I hear anything in this room? Next, Chris also had the bedroom set up where he is exceedingly close to the TV beside his bed since he's visually impaired. And he has Mica speakers. Well, my brain saw Mica because it's 2 C's. Mica speakers, because MICA is the rock. Mica speakers that he was looking to upgrade. Rob urged him to go with Ascend HTM 200 SE speakers, but he had originally hoped to keep the price of his upgrade to around $350. So he had also considered NHT Super Zeros or asked if a receiver upgrade would make a bigger difference. So here come a couple of questions about that. The AVRant Intimus speakers are on sale right now. You could get the Intimus 4 series bookshelves and center for $315. He's heard the original Varus series speakers before and he really liked them. So might the Intimus 4 series speakers be a top choice? And by the way, what could be better for like a bedroom than something called Intimus? I mean, really.
So I mean, not only are they
we're talking about the bedroom, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. This is talking
I would
about
just buy the Intimus because they're called Intimus.
Because they're called Intimus. Well, I mean, not only are they just an excellent candidate, but it's free 2-way shipping as well. So
there you go.
There is zero reason not to try these. I am entirely in favor of this, Chris. I like that idea a lot.
Right. So unlike the real world, there is zero risk to that intimacy.
Nice pun.
It was terrible. He's also noticed the sale prices on refurbished Denon receivers over at Accessories for Less. Yes. He had originally considered spending his entire upgrade budget just on an X2400H, but now the X1400H is only $250. So he could get the X1400H and the AVRant Intimus 4 series speakers all for only about $100 more than 3 of the Ascend HTM 200 SE speakers. Is that too good to pass up? Yeah. What would he be losing by going with the X1400H instead of the X2400H? He'd still be getting Odyssey Multi-EQ XT, right?
Yes, he would. Yes, it would. I mean, I'm tempted to say, again, since the Hyperion Intimus speakers are free two-way shipping, I'm tempted to say just get those and try those with your current receiver first, because
absolutely
that might be it, and then you don't have to spend another $250 for any. Like,
right.
That's it. It doesn't look like that's a 4K TV. This little Samsung that he's got beside his bed there. So I'm not worried about 4K pass through and Dolby Vision and pass through and stuff like that. So I would encourage you to get the speakers all on their own first.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because I mean the price on the X1400H, I don't think it's going to shoot through the roof at any point.
No, there's going to be plenty of them.
So as far as the X1400H versus the 2400H, not a huge amount of differences. Not as many HDMI inputs on the X1400. It's got 6 instead of 8. It only has one HDMI output, not 2. The X2400H has 2 HDMI outputs. Don't think any of those features are going to be an issue.
Unless there's a TV in the master bathroom. I don't know.
Yeah, the X1400H doesn't have any sort of video processing in it, whereas the X2400H can do upscaling. But again, I don't think that's going to be an issue. And of course, the X2400H has a little bit more power, but you are so close to your speakers. You're using well less than a watt in all situations. So yeah, I don't see any reason why.
Yeah, no risk on trying the Intimus as you are set up now.
Yeah.
And then there's just not a lot of benefit in your particular situation to worry about going with the 2400.
In this situation, I don't think any of the HDMI differences or the very slightly less power is going to have any impact on your setup at all. So yeah, I think the X1400H is a good choice.
And let us know how intimate those Intimuses are when you try them. I look forward to hearing that. Okay, moving on to Mick M via Facebook. Mick lives in Australia, and he wants to upgrade to dual subs. He's got an old 12-inch Sherwood that is on its last legs, so he needs to replace it. But with his $1,000 Australian dollar budget, he isn't sure if he can afford duals. Any recommendations? Well, my first question for him is, are you listening to this mostly by yourself? Does everyone else in the house care that they get perfect, even bass response? Do you need 2 subs?
Yeah, do you only care about one seat? Well, but you'd have to have the combination of one seat and placement flexibility for the one sub.
Okay, but that's a question to ask. Do you really need the 2 subs? Now, it's nice to have 2 subs, but you might not benefit a lot. That frees up a lot of money.
Not only that, man, oh man, does that Australian dollar not buy you nearly as much subwoofer.
That's right.
I don't live there, Mick, but just searching what I could find online, man, oh man, I mean, I hate to say it, but the prices are definitely higher. For example, the SVS PB1000, which is $500 US, or about, what does it go for? About $650, $700 Canadian dollars?
Yeah, I think we talked about that recently.
It's just over 1,000 Australian dollars. Oh, now that means with his 1,000 Australian dollar budget, you probably could get a single PB1000. Which would be a great choice if you really only care about one seat and you have placement flexibility for that single PB1000.
There you go,
because there are no subwoofers less than that genuinely play down to 20 hertz. I'm really sorry to say. God, I wish there were. But yeah, the prices in Australia on subs it's not great. So a single PB1000, certainly to be considered, about the best I could come across, because I looked at Klipsch. I'm like, Klipsch is easily available all over the world. Their subwoofers are pretty darn good. The R12 is about the least expensive one they make that I would recommend. It does not get fully down to 20 hertz, but it's pretty good down to, I mean, they say minus 3 decibels at 29, and they're very honest with that. It will extend down to about 25. It's 800 Australian dollars. It makes no sense to buy that when the PB1000 is 1,000 Australian dollars, because you could still only get one of them.
Right,
you have 1,000 Australian dollar budget. So,
we also don't know anything about his room or.
No, we don't.
Anything there
we don't know
recommend.
about the room. So the best I could find is from Velodyne, their Impact 12. That is also not a sub that will fully play down to 20 hertz, but it will get you a good, I mean, again, I think they claim minus 3 dB at 29, just like the Klipsch. So I could find the Velodyne Impact 12 for 650 Australian dollars. I wouldn't have one of those as a single over the PB1000, even though the PB1000 costs more, it also performs a lot better.
Right.
If you care about full 20 hertz extension. You might be able to 1,300 Australian dollars for a pair of Impact 12s. That's a maybe. If you do have a large seating area and you care about all the seats, then you need dual subs. That's about the best deal I could find just researching online, Mick. I'm sorry, I wish I had a better answer, but
unless he can find something refurbished.
The subs that are $500 a piece, I'm like, I wouldn't. Isn't it awful to say I wouldn't buy anything that costs $500? But I wouldn't.
No, I understand. I understand. That's why I still don't have a subwoofer, and that drives Tom insane.
And you could get yours for $500.
Yeah, and I could get it for 500, but again, that's a chunk of change, and I have other things that I put a little more priority on. And my front speakers they play pretty low.
So honestly, Mick, I'm kind of leaning towards you spend your entire budget on a single BB1000.
There you go. So start there. 1F1, I hope that's one, I guess it looks right. Juan is in the process of building an addition onto his house. It will be a 28 by 32 foot space for a new kitchen and family room with an open concept layout. He wants the family room to have a 5.1 sound system, but it needs to be as close to invisible as possible. Definitely no speakers out in the room standing on the floor. Okay, we got to put them in the wall then.
Yep.
He already has an Anthem receiver to power the setup, and he was considering a DefTech 1010 in-wall subwoofer along with Klipsch or Aperion in-wall speakers for the front three. All right. The surround speakers will have to be in ceiling. Okay. He could maybe use on-wall speakers for the front three, but in-wall would probably go over better. His budget is $3,500. What would we recommend? Hey, man, you can do in-wall for $3,500 and get a nice experience, can't you?
Oh, sure could. And honestly, all the things that he already, suggested, if you got those, I wouldn't be like, oh, thumbs down, you did a terrible job. No, all of those are perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So if that's what you want to do, you've got a thumbs up from me. If I were doing this from scratch, if this were my place, and I wanted an in-wall sub and in-wall and in-ceiling speakers, I would go for RBH.
Okay.
They have... from everything I can, of course, I have not listened to every in-wall sub that's out there, but going by specs, going by trust, going by reviews, and going by some listening on my own, they have, in my opinion, the best in-wall subs that you can sort of get there. Now, they are not super cheap. You're talking about spending $1,500 to $2,000 just on the sub, but it's kind of worth it.
If someone's telling you have to hide all the speakers...
That's right.
You still want it to be very good, you gotta pay for the really good stuff to hide in the wall.
So I really like performance-wise, RBH's in-wall subs the best. You could go with their, I don't know if it's Visage or Visage, however they choose to pronounce
sounds exotic.
I like Visage.
Visage.
Again, I'm Canadian, so we tend to put a French spin on some words. But yeah, go with that series of in-wall and in-ceiling speakers, and you should be able to still hit this price point, even with the more costly in-wall sub from RBH. There is.
You're saying spend a good chunk of this on that in-wall sub. If
you got to do an in-wall sub, I want you to spend the money on it and do it well. So I would encourage you to go RBH there, and then their in-wall and their in-ceiling speakers are very good too. Right. So I would go with find an RBH dealer and go with that. That would be my top recommendation. There is Earthquake Sound. I like the designs of their speakers. Earthquake Sound really is a car audio company. But they basically took their car audio products and threw them in some enclosures and stick them in a wall now.
Well, it makes sense.
It does.
We've been sticking them indoors and sticking them in rear panels.
That's how in-wall speakers got their start, was just repurposing car audio speakers. So this is nothing new. I have a little bit of hesitancy on Earthquake Sound in that, what they post on their website is nonsense and their specs are completely wrong and not to be trusted whatsoever. So I'm not super gung-ho on them. They don't find a ton of reviews, but their prices are reasonable. Their car audio stuff is fine, and all they did was take their car audio stuff and stick it in an enclosure that you can mount in a wall. So RBH is my recommendation to you. It really is. But if you went with what you suggested, you're not getting a thumbs down from me with that stuff. Klipsch's or HSU in-wall speakers might make sense because you got a pretty large space. You're running them off of an AV receiver. you might want the higher efficiency. But generally, this is going to be in your family room. You're not going to be sitting a tremendous distance away from your front speakers. So we're not worried about like filling the whole space like you are with the subwoofer.
Right.
You got to consider the entire open space.
Because 28 by 32 is a lot of space.
That's right. And that's why I want you to get that RBH in-wall sub, because it's the good one. And then the speakers I'm less worried about. So
there you go. All right. Well, there's just something else to go look up and look at.
yeah.
Moving on to Carl R. Last week, we talked a bit about, well, I didn't, but Rob and Tom did.
We did. Tom and I did.
Talked a bit about Carl's projector setup, where he has the power cord going up into his attic and plugging into a small surge protector in an attic outlet. We mentioned how that might not be up to code. I don't know if it is. I'm not sure. And since we always recommend plugging a projector into a battery backup, we suggested that he might want to install a regular outlet on the ceiling close to his projector, but then instead of running the Romex back to his electrical panel, run the Romex from the ceiling outlet through his attic to a male inlet installed close to the rest of his equipment. That way, he could put a battery backup with the rest of his gear, and still have a way of plugging the projector into it, as opposed to putting a battery backup in his attic, which we didn't think was a good idea. Yeah, it just sounds wrong. But okay, but Carl says his attic is a huge open space that actually has the option of being finished and turned into a living space. He had multiple electrical outlets installed up there, all of which had to be okayed by the city, and the projector's cables go up into the attic through the projector's mount. So he's pretty sure everything's up to code and that having the attic outlets is fine. Isn't that how everyone would power a ceiling-mounted projector with an attic above? Does that info change our advice? Now, for me, I'm kind of if I'm convinced it's safe, I kind of don't care kind of guy. That's me. Like, to be honest, I swapped out a whole lot of outlets in this old 1960 house, and none of them are grounded, but they look grounded, and I don't care. I don't care. I just don't care. I'm sorry. Nothing has killed me yet. So I'm going to tell you, does it look nice and safe? Is there no way for it to fall out? Are the cables good quality? There's no way it's going to get wet or hit by anything. I think it's fine, but that's just Lee. And I could be super wrong.
We did say things confusingly. So having the outlets themselves up in the attic, that is fine. And he said he already had it okayed by the city. They inspected it. So if they say it's okay, it's okay.
Yeah.
So it's not the outlets in there. It's the power cord going up through your ceiling to that outlet that could potentially be a code thing. Mm-hmm. Now, he says it's going up through the projector mount. Do you have a box in the attic above that projector mount? Because what they're concerned about is a fire stop.
Right.
You have to have a fire stop in between. So if you have put a hole in your ceiling for the power cord to go through, that isn't okay. But it is okay to have a hole in the ceiling and then have an electrical box in the attic that covers that hole.
A junction box on top.
A junction box. Yeah. That's right. So if your projector's power cord has gone up through the projector mount, and above that projector mount in the attic, you have a junction box, and the power cord comes out of that and then plugs into this outlet that's been installed in the attic, that's fine.
Okay, all right.
But if you don't have the junction box, that's a little bit questionable also. Now, he's saying this attic could potentially be finished. Yeah, that's true. And so in Canada, we always call it the cold zone because outside is colder in Canada. Of course, in other places...
we call it the steaming hot zone.
That's right. So really what it is it's the uncontrolled zone versus the climate controlled zone.
Yeah.
So the inside of your house below that attic is definitely climate controlled. And he's had all this insulation installed in the attic. So that means right now, the way his attic is uncontrolled climate space, just like outside, which is what it's supposed to be. Essentially, the sheathing of your roof is supposed to be the same temperature inside and outside. Mm-hmm. That's important. Otherwise, the sheathing of your roof will rot.
Yeah, we don't want any moisture to form on anything.
That's right. So if you were to finish the space, you have to install baffles directly to the underside of the sheathing that separates the sheathing from the inside of the attic. Mm-hmm. Then you can insulate around those baffles, take out the insulation that is currently above your ceiling, and now you have converted the attic into a living space. Mm-hmm. But the way it is right now, you don't appear to have baffles on the sheathing going to the your actual roof. So right now, inside your attic and outside your attic, those are meant to be the same temperature. Your attic should be vented right now. Those vents should be cooling or making the inside of your attic the same temperature, which is why you have this blanket of insulation covering your ceiling. So that means you have to have a vapor barrier, right? You want to be able to have moisture go out of your living space into the attic, but not from the attic into your living space. So once again, you'd have to have a junction box covering any openings on the ceiling. That would then need to be covered by a vapor barrier, and then your insulation on top of that. I mean, that's code in Canada. I don't know if it's different elsewhere, but
right. Well,
that's
all
the
of
way
that wouldn't be too hard to kind of rig up. I mean, we see the goal here.
Regardless, unless you did convert this into living space, I wouldn't put a battery up in the attic.
No.
You just don't do it. So
No,
our answer remains the same. It is the same answer we have for anybody, and whether this is a basement setup or an attic setup or anywhere in between. What we like to do is you install an outlet on your ceiling next to your projector that has a junction box on the back of it, an electrical box, as you probably would do. Mm-hmm. Of course, any outlet that you would install in the ceiling, normally you'd run the Romex back to your main electrical panel for power. But instead of doing that, you run it to a male inlet that you install near your gear. And what you have essentially done is created an extension cord. But it's an extension cord that's up to code because it has junction boxes on the back of it, and it's Romex that's running through your attic. That's all it is.
That doesn't sound too hard. That does not sound too hard. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
That's something someone like me could rig up and feel good about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Anybody could do that. So.
All right.
That's still same answer there, Carl.
Same answer and very specific.
But hopefully said a little bit more clearly, because we were pretty vague and confusing when we said it last time.
That was very clear. So I agree. So maybe my idea of does it look okay than it is, that's probably not the right way to go. Just want to be clear on that too. I'm full of it. Ted M has sent a question. Ted is all set to go with the JVC RS540 projector and Seymour AV ultrafine screen that we recommended. He called AV Science also as recommended, and they suggested he might want to go with a Screen Acoustics V6 Ultra Weave screen instead, even though they are a Seymour Screen Excellence dealer as well. What do we think?
Yeah, so Seymour Screen Excellence is the dealer division of Seymour AV, and it costs more. If you buy directly from Seymour AV, you hit your budget, whereas if you go Seymour Screen Excellence, you're probably over your budget. So that's one consideration.
Okay.
Now, the Screen Acoustics Ultra Weave, I have no experience with. They do, if you go to Screen Acoustics' own site, they're like, AV Science is the exclusive dealer of Screen Acoustics. So I don't know if it's their own thing that they made or what exactly is going on there. I will say, I mean, the screen looks fine enough. I do trust the folks at AV Science. I don't really doubt that someone other than Seymour AV managed to create a really ultra fine weave acoustically transparent screen. It's not impossible to have been done, so I'm fine with that. I hate the mounting method that they describe on the website. Anyway, I don't know. I'm assuming what they have as the V6 Ultra Weave on their website is what you would be getting. And the way that they have you attach the screen to the frame, I hate that method.
What are they having you do exactly?
Essentially, you use like a little edge tool to like squeeze the fabric into a little channel in the frame. So it's all friction fit.
Okay.
I hate that mounting method.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible for you to do it at home without getting wrinkles in your screen. And even when you do, that can come loose over time. I, on the other hand, love the Seymour AV mounting method, which is O-rings. It's so much easier than everybody else's mounting method. And it keeps the tension uniform even as the screen ages. And if an O-ring snaps, you replace it with another O-ring. It's really easy.
That sells me on it right away. I mean, I don't understand. So literally, the other one, you're smushing it into a groove.
Yeah. With like a butter knife, basically.
What? Why?
No,
I'm with you, and I've never even seen it.
Well, it is cheaper, so I guess that's why. But I hate that. So, yeah, I mean, we know from experience that the Seymour AV ultrafine screen is like, that's about as good as it gets, man. So I'm not changing my recommendation. I'm not saying the Ultra Weave fabric is lesser. I don't know, but I have no reason to say that it would be, and I do trust AV Science's recommendations. But just on the mounting method alone, I'd stick with Seymour AV.
All right. No, that's a compelling argument right there. Another AV science recommendation was the Panasonic UB820 Ultra HD Blu-ray player, since the RS540 will automatically go into HDR picture mode, but it only has one HDR tone mapping curve. Do we agree with that recommendation?
I mean, if your main source is going to be physical discs,
yeah.
I mean, I do like that UB820, and it's a fantastic partner for any projector, any HDR projector, because the Panasonic player will do the tone mapping.
That's the one we were talking about earlier?
That's the one. That's the one that does dynamic tone mapping of its own when your display doesn't do dynamic tone mapping.
Okay, so yeah.
So I do like that. Now, of course, though, it only applies to physical discs and whatever streaming services are built into that Panasonic. So it's a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
There is supposedly the cheaper UB420 on its way. There have been some European reviews of it. Supposedly coming out, they said it was coming out in North America in 2018, but I don't think that's going to happen because we're getting pretty close to the end here.
Running out of 2018, yeah.
But they did describe it as having really bad build quality.
Oh, well, let's not wait on that then.
The guts inside are just so the guts inside of the 420, it doesn't do Dolby Vision, and the 820 does, but on a projector that doesn't matter. So all of its other guts, the 420 has the same insides, but apparently its build quality is really bad. So yeah, if discs are going to be your main thing, I do like, if you need an Ultra HD Blu-ray player anyway, and you're okay with the price, yeah, it's a good
all right, that sounds appropriate for that projector situation. Right. Looking at Seymour AV's screen offerings, their smallest standard size is 85 inches wide, which is about 95.5 inches diagonal, which would create a 48-degree field of view from his approximately 8-foot viewing distance. That sounds just about perfect, but he's wondering whether that angle means he should put his on-wall speakers behind the screen, or if his front, left, right should be outside the screen. With the room being 12 feet wide, once the screen's frame is accounted for, he'd have 2.2 feet on either side of the screen if the speakers go outside the frame. He'd have absorption on the side walls either way, so which setup will give him the best results? My temptation is to push those things out. That's just me.
He was a little bit concerned about like Dolby's placement guidelines, but there's a range, right? The angles you're allowed is anywhere from plus or minus 22.5 degrees to either side of deadhead center out to plus or minus 30 degrees to either side.
He's within that.
He's within that pretty much either way.
Yeah, he's almost in the middle of that.
Yeah, so even if you put them just to the insides of your screen or just to the outsides of your screen, you're still within the Dolby ranges. Now, given how critical we know Ted has been of the imaging and sound staging of his legacy Silhouette on-wall speakers, I must, for Ted, recommend that you experiment with this before you put the screen up and mount.
Always, yeah.
And physically mount the speakers. You, Ted, must. I mean, for most other people, I'm probably in agreement with Lee. I tend to put the front, left, right speakers outside of the screen, unless I'm going for an enormous 55 or 60 degree field of view. If I'm going for what I tend to like, which is a 45 degree field of view.
45, yeah.
Then it's perfect having the front, left, and right speakers just to the outsides of the screen. And you're talking about like a 48-degree field of view. It also makes sense.
Right.
But knowing how critical Ted is of the imaging concerns, you Ted, must experiment before you permanently mount any of this. And there's no right or wrong answer here. Either one could work. I don't know in your exact room which one will give you the imaging that I know you, Ted, are looking for.
Listen to this. You don't get this kind of specialized recommendations from other podcasts. This would be like if the weatherman on TV told you whether or not it was going to rain at your house. So listen up, Ted. Specifically, Ted, try it both ways.
For everyone else, I would say go with whatever you think looks nicer, because you're within spec either way.
But Ted in particular has a little issue with this, so that makes perfect sense. I mean, I would try, if anytime you have a question, just try both ways if you can, right? So there you go. You can't get more specific help than we get on the show. You personally, it's like you have to send us your DNA and we tailor it just for you. We're going to have our own 23andMe thing going on here. Brandon G. Should surround back speakers be aimed towards the primary listening position or just aimed straight forward? What would be the advantages and disadvantages either way? Well, if it's only you, aim it right at you.
Even then, maybe not.
Maybe not.
So there's two schools of thought. One is that you want directional sounds even from behind you. The other is that you only want any sounds that are not from in front of you to be diffuse and not super localizable. If you fall into the camp of I want the sounds to be kind of diffuse and not super localizable, you're probably going to elevate your surround back speakers a little bit, which we still recommend doing anyway, at least enough to give you a clear line of sight from the tweeters of the surround backs to all listeners. We still recommend that. But if you want the more diffuse sound, you probably elevate them even a little bit higher, and you would aim them straight forward, and they're essentially firing over the heads
Over your head.
of everybody. That's if that's the effect that you want to go for.
Right.
If you're more into object-based audio and Atmos and DTS-X now, we're more into being able to localize the sound. Now, that doesn't mean you necessarily aim them straight at you.
Right.
What you would want to do is every speaker has a dispersion pattern. It's kind of a cone of sound, you can think, that comes out the face
You
of the
want to be
speaker.
in the cone if you're in that
You want to be in the
school of thought.
cone.
Right.
And the way I always do it is I play some pink noise out of that speaker, and I start with myself very close, within about a foot, straight in front of that speaker. And then I move myself to the left, and I move myself to the right. I move myself up, and I move myself down. And you will hear the timbre of the pink noise change a little bit, sometimes gradually, sometimes quite abruptly at a certain point. But either way, you'll be able to say, oh, I can get about this far to the left, about this far to the right, about this far up and down, with the pink noise sounding pretty close in timbre. And then beyond that point, the timbre clearly changes. And that sort of gives you your cone, and you want the speakers aimed such that all of the seats fall within that cone, and that'll give you the more directional sound.
I kind of like directionality and being in the cone.
I've fallen into that camp now too.
And wherever you sit, you want to be able to turn and see with your eyeballs each speaker. You don't want, someone's head blocking your
Yes,
your
there should be a clear
view.
line of sight.
If ear view can be a word I just invented there, but yeah, your ear view should be clear to each speaker. Shall we move on to Randy?
I would love to hit two more if possible, but if you got to go, you let me know.
Let's move on to Randy. Randy E. Randy wants an acoustically transparent projection screen. All right, more projection screen stuff. He sits 10 to 11 feet away. He does not want any sort of DIY solution, and his budget is under $1,000. Is Elite Screens Acoustic Pro UHD a good option, or would we recommend something else? I bet you're going to say Seymour AV.
Yes, I would recommend something else. I'm not a huge fan of Elite Screens acoustically transparent options. They do have some color shift to their screen, which you can calibrate out, but it's a little bit more hassle than I'd really love to go to. So high or low is what I end up recommending. On the high end, Seymour AV. 10 to 11 feet away, you could benefit from the ultrafine. Once you get to 12 or 13 feet, I'm pretty comfortable recommending just about any woven acoustic transparent screen as far as you not seeing the weave pattern.
Right.
But 10 to 11 feet, you're close enough that I would strongly consider going with the ultrafine. Now, if you go with their less expensive precision frame, the 120-inch size with the ultrafine fabric and the precision frame is just over $1,000 from Seymour AV. So it's definitely within the realm of possibility.
That's on budget, more or less.
Yeah, if you don't get that, I would suggest going with a silver ticket. I like their frame, their woven material. I would be more comfortable if you were 12 or 13 feet away, to be completely honest, but it's not bad, and it's certainly no worse than Elite Screens' version. $400 for their 120-inch version.
That's a big price difference.
It's a big price difference. Yeah. Personally, I think at your viewing distance that the Seymour Ultrafine would be worth it. If this is an investment, you're going to have it for a long time. I think I can make that argument quite easily. But yeah, I would kind of leave the Elite Screens as the odd man out. If you're not going to get the Seymour, I'd go even less expensive. I'd get the silver ticket. All
right. There's two very good recommendations. That was an easy one. Terry G. Terry bought a JVC RS540 projector. He loves its picture quality, and he's having fun tweaking it. But there are so many settings.
There are.
And the way HDR is handled is confusing. So he thinks he will eventually hire a professional calibrator, but do they charge separately for every setting and source device? As I understand it, they charge per a screen or per projector.
I mean, they're free to charge however they choose.
Yeah,
I
guess just work it out with them.
Essentially independent contractors. Most professional calibrators these days, what most of them are doing is they'll give you a standard dynamic range night mode, a standard dynamic range day mode, and an HDR mode. And sometimes they'll do a game mode as well if you're a gamer. But usually that's sort of the standard, those three modes for a single input on the projector.
Okay.
That's what most cover. If you need specific calibrations for specific source devices, that usually is an added charge in most cases. Like I say, they're free to charge however they choose, but most will. If you need multiple inputs calibrated, sometimes there's a small upcharge for that. I mean, if they're just copying the settings, usually not much. But if you need independent calibrations for different inputs, that's usually an upcharge as well. But most of them you can probably count on the one main input, so like from your AV receiver into your projector, that one main input, usually the three modes, and maybe four if they do the game as well. That's kind of what most are doing these days.
And I would also say, you know, for any kind of professional like that, it's okay to haggle a little bit. I mean,
absolutely, ask them.
Don't
around.
Be rude and like lowball them or anything, but you know, just ask them and tell them exactly what you need, and then you know that way there's no surprises. He knows the Panasonic UB820 is getting a lot of love. We just mentioned that, since it can tone map all HDR discs and send a consistent signal out to the projector. But he already has an Oppo 203. Can the Oppo do just as good a job? Again, there are so many settings. So many.
It can't because the Oppo doesn't do dynamic tone mapping of HDR. What the Oppo does is HDR to SDR conversion, where instead of it sending out an HDR signal that kicks your projector into HDR mode, it'll stay in SDR mode, but with the wide color, with the Rec 2020 color or the DCI color in a Rec 2020 container. So you get the wide color, you get the 10-bit color, but it converts the HDR to SDR. That's what the Oppo is really good at. And so here's the thing. So you got the Panasonic. If you're worried just about discs, you could make the argument, because as we just discussed, it does do a really excellent job of dynamically tone mapping physical discs and its built-in streaming services, although those aren't like the best versions of any of those streaming services.
And everybody's streaming apps built into their devices seem to have little quirks.
Yeah. And
everybody has some little quirk.
Yeah, you don't usually get the lossless audio or the Atmos audio from Netflix. Stuff like that is missing. So it's a little bit hard to justify unless discs are your thing. That's what you're getting this for. The argument can be quite easily made that using the HDR to SDR conversion is a good way to go. I would do it in the following manner. When you're watching actual SDR, I would have one picture mode for that. Perhaps two picture modes, like a day and a night mode if you want to get into that. But with a projector, it's probably always going to be dark. So I would have one picture mode for actual SDR content. Because with a projector, with SDR content, the standard dynamic range is from 0 to 100 nits, but a projector is supposed to show that at 0 to 50 nits. That's what a projector is supposed to do. When you get to HDR, it has to convert that to a range of 0 to 100 nits anyway. That's what a projector is giving you in HDR mode. So if you convert HDR to SDR, you're really not losing anything, because it's converted it from what was potentially 0 to 10,000 nits in HDR mode down to 0 to 100 nits.
Okay.
So if you have a second picture mode, which you would manually have to put the projector into, right? It's not going to detect that this is HDR now. So you have the one slight hassle of you have to manually put your projector into this second picture mode. But it is a second, technically SDR picture mode, but now allowing the projector to go from 0 to 100 nits instead of just 0 to 50. And the Oppo converting HDR into a 0 to 100 nit range will actually do an excellent job of preserving all the HDR detail. And because you've calibrated these two separate picture modes, you will see the added brightness and the expanded contrast. So I'm pretty in favor of doing that, to be honest, because the Oppo does an excellent job of converting HDR to SDR. It's just the slightly less convenient thing of you have to manually choose your picture mode, but that's it.
Okay. So
on the projector.
no compelling reason to run out.
And then you have the option of plugging other sources into the Oppo, because the Oppo has an HDMI input.
Oh, yeah.
And the Panasonic does not. And now all your sources can benefit from the Oppo's HDR to SDR conversion. I like that.
That sounds like a clever way to keep the situation the same for a while longer.
It's a workaround that a lot of people on AVS Forum have done with the JVC projectors, because they're like, hey, guess what? HDR is only 100 nits anyway. That sounds like standard dynamic range, doesn't it?
Huh. All right. A couple of more things here from Terry. The JVC's info screen can show all kinds of readings, including max CLL and
that is the maximum content light level.
Maximum content light level and max fall. What is
that? Is the maximum frame or something average? Frame average? Field average? Whatever it is, average light level. It's the average light level. There
you go. Okay, so its info screen can show those readings, max CLL and max fall from HDR content. When he's using his Apple TV 4K, these values can vary wildly. Most Dolby Vision content on Netflix gives 4,000 and 1,000 values respectively. But there was some content on from NASA that gave 1,000 and 28 values respectively. Not 28,000, 28. Yeah.
I bet you were looking at black space, so the average light level was very low. Yeah. little specks here and there.
Yeah, space is very empty and dark.
That's right. Mostly dark, some little bright objects. That makes sense.
The average population is 0. I learned that from Hitchhiker's Guide. There's really nothing out there if you look at it on average.
That's right.
Should he be using different settings, either on his Apple TV 4K or on his JVC or on both every time the values change? Would a professional calibration take care of that? No, everything's fine.
So, I mean, if you're just plugging the, essentially not having the Oppo in between, so again, you have the option here. You plug all your sources into your AV receiver. The AV receiver's one HDMI output actually goes into the Oppo. And the Oppo now acts as a video processor, and anytime it's getting HDR from the sources, it's converting that HDR to SDR. That's one way to get around this whole thing, because now the Oppo is taking whatever the HDR values are coming out of the Apple TV 4K, but it's converting it down to SDR for your JVC to display. That's one way to do this. But if you don't do that, and you just have the Apple TV 4K signal going into the JVC and kicking the JVC into its HDR mode, I mean, you could. You could have different HDR picture modes, one for 1,000 nit content, one for 4,000 nit content. You might have one for 500 nit content, because there's plenty of that out there too. You could. Most people don't, because you would have to know. So I guess you could look at this info screen and then change to the appropriate picture mode. And a calibrator could do that for you, but I'm sure in that instance, they would definitely have a small upcharge, because you're asking them to do multiple HDR calibrations and give you multiple picture modes. So I would expect an upcharge for that. It could be done. Most people don't, but it could be.
Yeah. And I detect that Terry has settings anxiety here, so we want really the simplest situation.
The simplest is converting it to SDR.
Yeah, really so I think what Terry wants to know is, well, how can I stop thinking about this? And he, just like so many of us, we just want to know that we're not losing something or missing something or getting something wrong.
That's his last question. Yeah,
right. He's heard how super bright HDR signals might get clipped. How would he know if details are being clipped or just rolled off? Again, sort of settings anxiety. Am I missing something?
That's right.
Is everybody's concern.
Well,
how would he know?
Other than seeing it on a display that isn't clipping it,
right?
It's pretty hard for you to just tell in real time.
Yeah, you just can't.
Because it just means it faded to white.
Right.
And as far as you're concerned, it looks like it faded to white. Maybe there's a little object in there that you would have been able to see if it hadn't clipped, but you wouldn't be able to know just in real time. So yeah, you can't really know. For example, the Sony projectors are set so that if the maximum content light level is 1,000 nits, it will retain all of that detail. But if it's above 1,000 nits, it just clips it off. That's what they do.
If clouds in the sky are looking realistic, if stars in the galaxy are looking realistic, I would think you would kind of notice a washing out effect on lots of content. I don't know.
But I mean, we've been watching standard dynamic range for so long that and standard dynamic range has lots of washout to white, that it doesn't look any different, right? There's nothing cluing you in that this is significantly different. It's only if you do see it, you go, oh, there's actually more detail in that bright stuff than there would have been in standard dynamic range. Again, I'm kind of in favor of just letting your Oppo convert it down to SDR because it does a really good job.
Well, then that sounds like the thing to do. That settles his mind on a lot of these things.
It does. I mean, the Panasonic could do it as well. It's just the Panasonic can only do it for physical discs or its own built-in streaming. Yeah,
and he's got to go buy it. I like the idea that Oppo doing it for everything. That's really neat.
Again, we're coming back to let's ignore the thing and have our device retone map this stuff. Coming back to that.
Yeah, so all this stuff we've been worried about, stop worrying about it.
Well, there we go.
Here's the Oppo. You want to do, let's do another one. I'm here for
Are you sure? If you're okay, I'm okay.
All right, I'm here for at least a little bit longer. What we got here?
Sure,
this goes forever. So I scroll ahead here, a little background info to see, and I'm like, jeez. Okay, so let's talk about Joey's question, and we'll also do Daniel, and then I'll
really.
Yeah,
wow.
We can do Joey and Daniel. How about
Holy
that?
Cow! All right, I'm in.
Here to help. Joey M on Facebook. Joey is just curious if we have any thoughts about HDAM, Hyper Dynamic Amplifier Module, on Marantz receivers. It seems to be a differentiator between Marantz and Denon. Is this something real, Rob, or is this a fancy way of saying something that's pretty mundane?
Well, I mean, it's a Marantz trademark, so they continue to use it. If you read Marantz's own glossary of what they are, the DAM, HDAM, Hyperdynamic Amplifier Module, whatever you want to call it.
Damn.
Yeah, really. It's on the preamplifier section. You might think with a name like Dynamic Amplifier Module that it has something to do with the actual amplifiers, but it's not. It's the preamplifier stage. That's where this device is. And they, in their own write-up, they're like, this replaces traditional off-the-shelf op amps, like most other AV receivers are using. Operational amplifiers, right? Which you'll also find in like headphone amplifiers. This is when you're taking a very, very weak signal and preamplifying it to the preamplifier output stage, but it's not the full signal amplification at this point.
Right.
So it's their version of an op amp that you would find in any preamplifier. These days, so going way back to when like op amps were a brand new thing and there were significant differences in terms of noise and bandwidth and reliability of off-the-shelf op amps. This was Marantz's one of their things. They're like, we have our own surface mount design. This is our own version of it. And it was cleaner and lower in noise and all the rest of it. These days, the op amps that you can get from like TI are so good that there is no difference. There's no performance difference. The op amps that you would get in a Denon preamplifier stage are every bit as good as the HDAM preamplifier stage in a Marantz. It's just they still hold the trademark, so they still put it in there.
So there's the thoughts.
That's my
that you asked for. Do you have any thoughts?
There's no advantage to it. It's just it's still their thing. So
if you traveled back in time with it, you could impress people.
Yes.
But no need now. Okay, there you go, Joey. Daniel H. And I will wrap it up for myself after this and let you continue if you wish.
Oh, no, that's fine.
How long do you want to make a podcast? We've got plenty of bandwidth. Daniel H. Daniel has been an AV Rant listener from the beginning. That's been a while. He says he misses Dina. Yeah, that's a long time ago. And Liz, I do too. But he loves the current format of the show. So he says, thanks for all the hard work we've put in. I don't put in hard work, Daniel.
I do put in hard work to this show, but
a lot of hard work. So
I love it, and I'd probably be doing it anyway. So why not share?
What I work at is trying to be the questioner and representing all the people who can't understand Rob. So when he says something confusing, I try to help everyone like you, Daniel. Daniel had a Pioneer Kuro. Oh, nice. And once 4K and HDR were established, he wanted the best display, so he wound up buying a Sony Z9D or Z9D. For SDR and 1080p, it never quite matched the reference quality picture of his Kuro, I can imagine. And now that he has spent some time with an OLED, he can see why Rob has been saying that LCD TVs, as good as they are, just can't quite stack up. And that's just the truth, man. That's where we are nowadays. But Daniel super duper cares about meeting standards and having a reference quality experience. Okay. His settings anxiety, like we talked about. It must be correct. And while the Z9D can't produce 4,000 nits, let alone 10,000 nits, it can produce well over 1,000. And most HDR content seems to be mastered to 1,000 nits. So is that true? Is most of it, is that the standard for mastering these?
Most is, yeah.
All right, great. So for all that 1,000 nit HDR content, the Z9D doesn't have to tone map at all. It can just faithfully reproduce the signal as intended. Nevertheless, OLED just looks better. Yeah. But it bothers him to no end that OLEDs cannot reproduce even 1,000 nit content, quote, correctly. I mean, I get the feeling, but okay. So is there really no such thing as truly reference quality TV available today? Interesting question. He's concerned that if he swaps his Z9D for an OLED, he's just going to be bothered by a different set of inaccuracies and imperfections. Is he missing something? What should he do? Oh, I know this pain. But see, the thing is, I think it comes down to, I mean, it's just a different, when you have emissive pixels as opposed to passive pixels, the light's coming from behind it. That's just the difference. It looks so much more natural and real. And the fact that it is a screen disappears, even though that range from black, well, black is kind of infinity on an OLED. And that's another reason it looks so good. So even though
when it's black, it's the same as its frame. There's no difference.
Yes. So, I mean, it's inky black as outer space. So that's why those lower number of nits on an OLED look so good, because you're going from infinity black to this very pure white on
and
something
right beside each other. Like no fudging, no haloing, no hazing.
Right. There's nothing hazy. There's nothing straight. And that picture quality doesn't drop off as you move from one side to the other. So if you're on one side of your couch and you want to lay your head over on the armrest, some LCDs, honest to goodness, parts of them will look a little different just in that movement.
That's
and
true.
I think all that together is why that OLED looks so fantastic. But you're sitting there thinking, am I missing some dynamic range?
Right. And as you experienced, it comes so close to being perfect that it's all the more annoying that it isn't quite perfect, because it isn't. Yeah, OLED is not still, it is still not perfect. You do have potentially that little bit of vertical streaking in the very dark images. You
I remember that. Yeah.
sometimes get some color banding, you know, even with the gradation smoothing, right? And that's largely to do with the source, but you know, you can still, so you're not going to have a perfect image, but it gets tantalizingly close, which is sometimes all the more annoying. But there is one thing that I'm not going to say you're missing it, but I'm going to say I'm going to try and change your mindset about it. Because you are not alone whatsoever, Daniel, in the perception, in the thinking that, okay, here's what the signal says. So anything other than showing exactly that, right? The signal is saying, give me 1,190 nits. And if I give you anything other than 1,190 nits, that must not be 100% correct, right? That must be inaccurate in some way. But HDR was not envisioned as being an absolute system. It was envisioned as being an absolute signal, which was new. It's no longer a signal where the value coming out is applied to a floating curve. We're now applying these values to exact absolute values of nits, but it was always intended that the signal would exceed the capability of the display.
Right.
Particularly Dolby, which is why they came up with dynamic metadata for Dolby Vision. That was the whole idea, was that they were going to create a future-looking signal where as display quality and capability kept increasing over time, we would be able to see more and more of what was in that original signal. But it was never intended that today we would be able to see that entire signal. You would have to tone map down the range of colors. Like no TV today can show the full Rec 2020 color, which we're not really using. So that's okay, but we could be. We could be using Rec 2020 color. The container is there in the signal, but the TV can't display it. Does that mean that, yes, in the strictest sense, no TV would be accurate if it were a Rec 2020 signal, but that doesn't mean you're not seeing what you are intended to see. Let's not say supposed to, let's say what the director intended, what the content creator intended. And that's the mindset that we need to get into, is that HDR should not be about nits. It should not be about light level. It should not be about brighter. It should be about detail.
Detail.
That's what matters.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Yeah,
completely.
So can you see the detail? And if it is tone mapped well, which the LG OLEDs and the Sony Master Series OLED with their dynamic tone mapping, they tone map it really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
So you are seeing all the detail. You are seeing what you were intended to see, even though the signal is requesting more nits than the OLED can actually give you. What matters is everything in this image that was supposed to be slightly brighter than the thing below it. Can I see those demarcations? Can I see all the levels of light in this image?
Yeah.
And even though I had to shrink that down to a slightly smaller range, I can still see those steps in between each
right.
of
So
these
you're not cutting off
brightnesses.
anything.
No.
And you're compressing a bit, but you're not cutting off anything.
Yeah,
and so you're saying the whole system of HDR is designed for tone mapping.
Absolutely,
because
because
it's supposed to be tone mapped. They never expected,
technically you could be
display.
telling yourself that your Z9D is no good because there is some 10,000 nit content, particularly in video games, and some Ultra HD Blu-rays that were not authored correctly. There is 10,000 nit content, and there's no TV that is showing you 10,000 nits when the signal says give me 10,000 nits. Not even close. So yeah, it's seeing the detail. That's what's important, and effectively the OLEDs can do that better than the LCD, because when the backlight is on in the LCD, now you're at the mercy of the LCD's contrast. It can only show you the steps between the darkest and the brightest that the LCD panel itself can produce given a certain backlight level. So if you have, in the case of the Z9D, you got 600 some on local dimming zones, but that's divided by over 8 million pixels. There are going to be times when some of those pixels are right beside each other, sharing a dimming zone, and they're supposed to have a greater difference between dark and bright than the LCD panel can show you. The OLED
now that
panel,
makes it make sense. So yeah, you actually end up with possibly more compression of that dynamic range from light to dark on an LCD that puts out more nits. It's just the whole thing is brighter. But it doesn't have the range.
It doesn't have the range.
That's why an OLED can look better with less nits, because it has the greater range and the ability to put a light dot next to a dark dot.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
better
it's
than
a little bit of changing the mindset. That's what you are, quote unquote, missing, to use the word.
Right. So when you think reference quality, you're not supposed to think perfect quality, not some magical perfect unicorn television, but how close does it get to the experience they're wanting you to have?
That's right. Are you seeing all the detail in the image? And the OLED will actually do that better.
Okay. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Now, he has one more comment before we go. On the audio side, he's gung-ho for Atmos. All righty. He avoided it for a long time since he has a high ceiling with a slant on only one side, but he ended up using one regular in-ceiling speaker and one in-ceiling speaker that has an angle built in to basically counteract the slant of his ceiling. It's a 5-2-2 setup. And he thinks it's a way better upgrade than 4K video was. Wow. So he encourages anyone asking to add Atmos. He is into this. Now he's going to be in that camp of people that likes localizing sounds.
Yep, I would think so.
So he loves that he can tell stuff is coming from right over his head. He loves it. And I don't blame him. It's neato. I'm with him.
Tom's comments and my in-between comments. I'm a bigger fan of Atmos than Tom is, but that all got spurred on because we had someone who wrote into us to say, I've heard so much about Atmos, I went to the expensive Atmos, and I didn't think it was any great deal at all. So we have the spectrum.
No, that's right. It is really weird. We're to a point now where some of these, well, I shouldn't call them tricks, but Atmos is a bit of a trick. And HDR even is a bit of a trick. It makes things more realistic, but you have to go somewhere and see something, hear something, and see if it makes a difference to you.
But you know what? In terms of trying to offer advice or recommendations to a wide audience who are going to have different tastes, I come back to try going from 5.1 to 7.1. Because that's something that a lot of people can do on a temporary basis a little bit more easily than installing something on their ceiling.
I wish I could. I've got nowhere to go behind me.
But you could, temporarily, bring in a folding chair and put something behind you and just try the experience. Because the only thing I'm getting at is some people hear 7.1 versus 5.1 and they go, I love it. And some people go, who cares?
I don't want to know if I love it because I can't do it. If
and some people go,
it,
I actually dislike this more than just 5.1, right?
Or you might just go, meh.
That's right. So I think that is going to be very similar to how you judge Atmos. Because if you're the person who went from 5.1 to 7.1 and go, I love it, I think you will be the person who goes to Atmos and goes, I love it. Whereas if you're the person who went from 5.1 to 7.1 and went, I couldn't care less, I don't think you're going to care a ton about Atmos either. I think there's quite a similarity between having surround back speakers, what you think of adding those, and what you think of adding speakers above you. I think it's quite similar.
I gotcha. And it's probably very space dependent. So it may be
definitely.
It may really tickle his ear holes because he has those high ceilings, and all of a sudden it changes the apparent sound space in that room.
It does. It changes the ambience. He'll have some overhead effects for sure.
Yeah. So it just brings sounds into an area that felt like a void for him before. That might be the case.
But there are some people who hear that and they go, I hate that. It's distracting. I don't like it at all. So what are you going to do?
I can't imagine I'd hate it. I have a feeling at worst I would just go meh, because there's a big jump between stereo sound and 5.1. But there isn't necessarily a big jump between 5.1 and 7.1 or 5.22. So you just kind of have to know what you like. And that's been true with all these questions tonight. Different people, like, was it like Dan earlier that you gave incredibly specific advice to?
Ted.
Just Ted. It was Ted. I forget names. I'm sorry. But that's it. It depends on exactly you.
It definitely. Well, for something like that, yeah, I fall into the camp of once I get used to something, I usually I miss it by omission.
Right.
Like when I take a step back, I go, oh, I actually did kind of like that.
Yeah. That's what it was like the very first, when I first got used to high def TV, and then would walk away and go look at a standard def TV, and it would look like, I one time told my wife it looked like a submarine porthole. It was just like, it looked like a big, heavy, weird glass thing. And I'm like, why are we watching this? We have to get a high def.
You managed to go from OLED back to LCD and survived. So,
well, no, I went OLED back to plasma and survived.
Oh, back to plasma.
Yeah. See, and plasma has a lot more in common with OLED because it's emissive and not passive. So that's why I went back to plasma and survived. And also it saved the money for now. And I just got mad at LG. Don't forget, I got mad at LG. Like, ooh, I just don't like that. So maybe I'll calm down and we'll try another one after the first of the year.
Maybe you'll spend even more on a Sony and be happy.
We looked at that. We might. I don't know. Maybe I need to spend more and feel better about it. Like some of these folks that just feel like something might be missing. And I hate that feeling. Anyway, I think that's it for us this evening, right?
That is it for tonight. We have John P. and Kyler B. still left on the list. We will answer you gentlemen next week. And so huge thanks to you, Lee. Thank you so much for co-hosting.
Oh, no problem.
Great.
I always love this. It's a blast every single time.
That's right. I want to thank our listeners of the week real quick. Again, if you'd like to donate to the podcast, avrant.com. Support the podcast over on the right-hand side for PayPal. Want to thank our 78 patrons over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast. And want to thank Jason G., who might be helping Tom's brother get a replacement PS3. So thank you to our listeners of the week.
Thank you.
And again, if you want to send your questions in, it's question@avrant.com. That is our email address. And if you'd like to reach Lee, where can they find you?
Find me on Twitter @LeeOverTweet.
Good stuff. Well, on behalf of Tom Andry, this has been AV Rant. I'm Rob H.
And I'm Lee Overstreet. Now go out and listen to something.